Harper Audio presents Bouncing Back, written and read by Joan Rivers. One morning 3 years ago, in the middle of a golf course, I asked God to strike me dead. "Take me now," I whispered. "With a little lightning. The sun is out, but you don't need rain. It'll look like an act of God." And I saw the headline, "Joan Rivers goes golfing." At that dark moment, I thought I had excellent reasons for wanting to move into a higher realm. Sally Marr and Her Escorts, the Tony-nominated play to which I had given my heart for 7 years, had just closed without any warning after only 5 months. Because the whole world had seemed to like the play, I had expected to run forever and had given up my day job, which was an Emmy Award-winning TV show. Suddenly, for the first time in 30 years, I found myself out of show business, facing days whose highlights would be lunch. In late-night TV, I had the future of a mosquito. David Letterman and Jay Leno continued to enforce their 10-year refusal to book me, and things were just as rosy for a new Joan Rivers show. CBS had commissioned a pilot, CBS had approved the pilot, and then CBS had said, "Sorry, Joan, demographically you're too old." And chronologically, too. And I was getting older by the minute in a business that prefers you to go in the other direction. At about the same time, Joan Rivers Products, the jewelry company that I had started and operated with great success, was forced into a bankruptcy mess created by its parent company, Regal Communications. The creditors of Regal Communications told me that if I didn't raise the $37 million the company owed them, I would have to design and sell my jewelry exclusively for them until the year 2023 to pay off this debt. There wasn't a day the ringing phone didn't bring me bad news, and then the phone stopped ringing. Yes, I thought that day on the golf course. My handicap was now life, and a kindly bolt of lightning would release me from the game. Enough was enough. How long can you keep fighting back? How often can you start again? But with the speed of that lightning, I suddenly knew that I could do it over again. My alternate career had been pulling myself up from rock bottom. I had survived being fat and being poor and being unwanted. I had survived being called a bitch and a no-talent and a has-been. I had survived being told that I was unfunny, that I was too funny, that I was too young, that I was too old. I had even survived tumbling from the top of the world into a unique hell when the Fox network suddenly canceled my late-night talk show and my husband Edgar committed suicide. And when still more blows befell me, I began to envy the good luck of Job. After Edgar's death, fate tossed me not only a heartbreaking estrangement from my daughter Melissa, but also a move to the brink of financial ruin. I had gotten through all of those ordeals, and I had rebuilt my bond with Melissa, and I had rebuilt my career, and I had created a new life for myself in New York. And so, on that day when I was hitting both a golf ball and rock bottom, I knew I could recharge my life one more time if I just used the strategies I had found 7 years before. "Excuse the call," I said to God. "I'll be in touch." And I went on. And in going on, I retained full ownership of my jewelry company, which is now global, and I signed a long-term contract to do specials for E! Entertainment Network, and I wrote another play, and I now have concert bookings all over the world, and I am just fine, thank you. My life in the last 3 years has confirmed my belief that you can get through anything. Moreover, I have been able to figure out how I survived twice, and how you can too. With this knowledge, I began giving self-help seminars all over the country. In the last 3 years, I have told thousands of people how I rebounded from tragedy and not only reinvented my life, but made the invention worth patenting. And now, I would like to share that patent with you. I hope you can learn something from me, as I have learned so much from all of you, because you know we all do learn from each other. One Ohio woman told me that her mother had just died after a long illness while she was going through a very bitter divorce. "I was at my wit's end," she said to me. "But then I heard you speak, and I realized that, just like you, I could pick myself up and start all over again." After one of my talks in Florida, a man said to me, "I've been depressed for so many years, nothing ever seemed to go right for me, but tonight, for the first time, I really believe I can turn my life around and find happiness again." When rejecting a script, Hollywood producers have a particular idiotic phrase. "It's in turnaround," they say. Does this mean the script has been put on a carousel or it's in a blender? What? However, a life in turnaround has a joyous meaning to it, and I can tell you how to do it no matter what kind of loss you've had. Not because I'm so smart, but because I have been there, and I've taken notes. The cliff notes that'll keep you from going over one. Maybe your husband just left you for another woman, one who doesn't yet know that he snores like an outboard motor. Well, I can help you start a new life, either happily single or with a man who will want to hang around you. Perhaps your house was just destroyed by fire. I'll show you how to accept that loss a lot faster than your insurance company does, and how to take the steps on what will lead you to happiness. Whatever kind of loss has laid you low, however despondent you feel, your pain is a very old story for the human race. Listen to me on this one. Loss has been the way of the world since Adam and Eve had to leave their garden apartment. Do you know that half of all marriages end in divorce? That 80% of women will be widowed in their lifetimes? That last year 1 in 5 new businesses failed and 1 in 20 Americans lost his job? No wonder Prozac is our favorite snack. Please be aware, there are many, many self-help tapes by PhDs, but I hold a totally different degree. It's an IBTIA. I've been through it all. This degree comes not on parchment, but on gauze, and it entitles me to tell you that there is a way to get through any misfortune. In this tape, you'll hear my account of the hell I intermittently went through and how I kept surviving, and you'll meet other people who insisted on surviving too. The fact that you've picked up this tape instead of the wit and wisdom of Snoop Doggy Dogg means you have the will to bounce back, and by the time you finish listening, I promise you, you will have the way. Mommy, Daddy killed himself. I sat in stunned silence as Melissa broke the news to me. My husband dead? He'd committed suicide? Suicide? Edgar? Surely it had to be some kind of terrible mistake. Edgar and I had spoken many times about suicide, and he had always believed that suicide was a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Could this man who had once loved life so much and who still adored his daughter have taken his life and left that daughter fatherless? Like many people who hear bad news unexpectedly, I was in a state of total disbelief. How had we tumbled so very far so very fast? The year 1986 had begun on such a high note with the launching of The Late Show starring Joan Rivers on the new Fox TV network. Edgar and I were both ecstatic. The show was our reward for 25 years of hard, diligent work. It was the payoff for my long years in tiny comedy clubs and the endless one-nighters, being alone in hotel rooms away from my family for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time, and then my slow, steady climb to stardom. It was a return on all the planning, the wisdom, and the love that Edgar had poured into my career. My husband and I had always worked so wonderfully together, I on stage and he behind the scenes, complementing each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. So when Fox offered me my own late-night talk show, Edgar and I assumed that our partnership in life and business would continue to be just as good as it always had been. But Edgar and Barry Diller, the chairman and CEO of 20th Century Fox, disliked and distrusted each other from the very start. Barry regarded Edgar as a hanger-on, not the professional my husband truly was. And Edgar was contemptuous of Barry's youth and arrogance and of his inexperience with talk shows. When the show didn't immediately live up to the network's projections, Diller and his colleagues made Edgar the scapegoat. The Fox management pushed my husband aside, taking away my working partner and robbing Edgar totally of his self-esteem. My husband was a proud man and more fiercely private than anyone I'd ever known. We had been married for over 15 years when he finally told me one night, as if it was some horrible confession, that he had suffered through tuberculosis as a child. The Fox executives trampled Edgar's pride, violated his fierce privacy, and scorned my attempts to protect him and our show. In May of 1987, they canceled The Late Show with Joan Rivers and issued press releases that vilified Edgar and humiliated me. Edgar suffered a great deal in the months that followed and changed from a secure man into a doubting, bitter, and depressed one. The doctors didn't realize at the time, but the medication he'd been taking since his heart attack in 1984 was creating a chemical imbalance that led to a deep depression. That condition, combined with the stress and humiliation he faced at Fox, totally broke Edgar's spirit. He was angry all the time and frequently turned his anger on me. His black moods lasted longer and longer till there were no longer moods but an endless despondency. It was so painful for me to see Edgar in such misery. Painful and frightening. What had happened to the man I had known and loved for so many years? What was going to happen to him if he didn't get help immediately? All that summer I tried desperately to convince him to get psychiatric care, something beyond his occasional talks with a psychologist, but he absolutely ignored my pleas. On August 10th, I returned home from a trip to New York and called Edgar to tell him I had landed safely in Los Angeles. During that phone call, I again mentioned psychiatric care, and again he refused. Finally, I had to accept the fact that Edgar was a drowning man, and that he was taking me down with him. I was so weary of fighting him, so tired of trying to help someone who refused my outstretched hand and my support. I simply did not know how to continue. "Edgar," I heard myself saying on the phone, "if you won't agree to get psychiatric help, I am not coming home to you." And I didn't. I went straight to the Century Plaza Hotel, where, exhausted and tearful, I fell asleep in my clothes. The next day, Edgar flew to Philadelphia to see his best friend and business advisor, Tom Pileggi. Phoning from there, Edgar promised that when he returned to Beverly Hills, he would at last get treatment for his clinical depression. He was lying, of course. Later that night, he spoke to Melissa on the phone, and he said he was feeling optimistic for the first time in a long time and was eager to get home. Melissa was the last person to speak to him, and he was lying to her, too. He had already made plans to take his life. After Edgar's suicide, Melissa and I told ourselves with agonizing guilt that we shouldn't have believed him when he said he was okay. I kept saying that we should have had someone to guard him day and night until he came home and admitted himself to a hospital. And Melissa felt the guilt over and over again of not having said something on the phone to stop him. However, I've learned through my work with other suicide survivors that if someone really, really wants to kill themselves, they will do it after convincing everybody else they're okay. And Edgar had convinced us. He had made all of us believe that he was feeling well and optimistic for the first time in ages, and Melissa and I had allowed ourselves to be optimistic too. She had spent time with her friends and had started getting ready for her sophomore year at the University of Pennsylvania, and I had gone into a hospital for some minor cosmetic surgery, thinking that feeling good about my appearance would help me recover from some of the battering my ego had taken since the Late Show was canceled. I imagined that when I got home from the hospital and Edgar returned from Philadelphia, we would once again be happy and mutually supportive and ready to face life's challenges. But the news that Melissa brought me that morning shattered all those hopes. Edgar had overdosed on Valium and Librium and had washed the pills down with scotch. I wanted to believe that his overdose was accidental, but Melissa told me her father had left 3 audio cassettes, one for her, one for me, and one for Tom Pileggi. The police had transcribed the tapes, and there was no doubt Edgar's death was a suicide. Even with that evidence, I still needed time to believe what I was hearing. And these days, as I travel around the country giving my lectures, I learn over and over and over again that disbelief is almost a universal initial reaction to bad news. And even when they believe the bad news, many people expect a reversal of the fact. My husband told me he was having an affair, says a woman named Betty, and I believed it. But for months I kept thinking that Steve was going to get tired of this fling, that it's just a midlife crisis, that he would be coming back to our marriage. When I was fired from my job with no notice, says a man named Len, I packed up my desk and took my belongings home. But for the next 3 weeks, I expected the phone to ring and my boss to tell me the company couldn't get along without me, that they absolutely wanted me back. Susan Bodnar, a Ph.D. and a psychotherapist, says, denial is a common defense mechanism that works by preventing a person from recognizing or experiencing information that is threatening to their self-preservation. Denial also serves to protect you from anxiety. But while denying bad news may seem to make life easier by shielding us from pain, it truly prevents us from dealing with that pain. And if you can't deal with it, you can't push forward. I wouldn't accept that my mother was dying, says a woman named Mindy. If I had faced it, I could have spent so many more special days with her. It was only when she came back from her last surgery that I realized she's really dying. And by then, she didn't have much time left. Today, Mindy is more realistic about bad news. Like many of us, she has learned painfully that accepting reality is really the only way to deal with it. Then you can force yourself to make decisions and to meet new challenges and to grieve for losses. If you're having trouble accepting the full impact of what you're facing, make a written account of what has happened to you. Make a list. In fact, keep a pad or a notebook with you as you listen to this tape to help you do the exercises that I suggest. Don't just think about them. Take out some paper or a notebook and in a few short sentences, write down the basic headlines of your challenge or your loss. If I had known to do this after Edgar's suicide, my prose would have looked something like this. Quote,
My husband of 22 years killed himself. My career is over. I'm a widow. My daughter, the most important person on earth to me, is now fatherless. We live in a big house and we have nice things, but because of all our bad investments, we are broke. Shorter than War and Peace, and not as funny, huh? Notice that I said Edgar killed himself, not passed away or left us. I also say unemployed, not between positions. Between positions is like a couple taking a pause during sex. All these euphemisms are fine for someone else's loss, but in accepting your own, please remember, use the simplest and bluntest words. Dead, cancer, raped, betrayed. These words may stick in your throat, but using them will help you confront the truth of your situation, and by knowing the truth, you will start to move yourself forward. Mark Twain always said, "Tell the truth. It will please some of the people and astonish the rest." Accepting the full reality of your blow will help you begin the important work of grieving, or will force you to spring into action to handle that crisis. But for your recovery to be complete, you need to understand not only the objective facts, illness, death, property destruction, but also what your situation means to you and how it will affect your life. So go back to your notebook and write down all the ways your loss is affecting you, not only the big ways, but also the little ways in which it hurts. When I really thought about what I had lost with Edgar's death, I looked back at 22 years of a marriage. Ours was the kind you really saw in Hollywood, genuine, deep, abiding. We loved each other and our daughter. We loved the life we had built for ourselves and the way we had blended career and family together. Like any other couple, of course, we had our fights and rough times, but we were as good a team as two people could be who live and work together. I was going to miss that partnership, that knowing someone so well that I could finish his sentences. And I was going to miss a lot of little things about Edgar, things I never thought about until they were gone forever. For example, he was a very educated, interesting man, and I, who always worried whether people would think I was smart enough, had come to rely on Edgar to keep me from being consumed by insecurity. People find it very hard to believe, but I am terribly shy. Edgar's death meant I would have to work through my shyness and go out there alone and talk to people one-on-one. I also missed Edgar on a very practical level. He wasn't only my best friend, lover, and partner. He was the man who knew how to balance the checkbook, program the VCR, park the car. I could do none of those things. Truly accepting my loss meant admitting that I was going to have to learn accounting for nitwits at the same time I was learning to live without my best friend. While learning how to conquer loneliness, I would also have to learn how to stop being the kind of woman who would invest in the Venus de Milo massage centers. Some of the details of your loss may seem insignificant or even petty. Of course, there's no way to compare the frustration of your having to set the clock on the VCR with the loss of a life partner. But accepting all the sad and silly ways your loss affects you is one key to moving ahead beyond that loss. Having learned that lesson with Edgar's death, I knew that when I was hit with devastating professional losses 2 years ago, I needed to know exactly what had happened, why it had happened, and what it had meant. In spite of what had sent me reeling, I needed to feel I could still somehow become the master of my professional life. After the Fox cancellation and Edgar's death, I had worked my way back into show business, starting with small little TV appearances, till I was finally starring in a Broadway play, Sally Marr and Her Escorts. With Edgar's initial help, I'd been working on this play for 7 years, and when it finally clicked, the sound wasn't a click, but a bang. When the curtain went up for the opening of the Helen Hayes Theater on May 5th, 1994, it was theatrical magic. The audience laughed and cried where I wanted them to. The reviews sounded as though I had written them myself. And then when I was nominated for a Tony, I thought, this is finally it. My life is wonderful again for the first time since Edgar's death. With that giddy optimism, I made plans to take the show to Los Angeles, to London, and then to Australia. Sally Marr was going to run longer than World War II. There was, however, one problem. The show's raves were going through the roof, but so were its costs, and we were barely breaking even. We had started out with just one piano. By the time we opened, we were headed for the Philharmonic. Moreover, we had 4 rear projectionists, not one. Do you know how much that costs? Neither did I. One black day, I learned that there was no way to keep the show open. I felt a nightmarish unreality at seeing it closed with 2 days' notice. I was heartbroken, but really, really heartbroken. It was like a death. In show business, I had always operated under the notion that you must have a dozen balloons in the air at all times because 11 of them are just going to burst. This time, however, I'd been waltzing along with just one balloon, my play, and suddenly it went pop. The air went out of it, and it went out of me, too. I was devastated. In the days that followed, I got out my pad and pencil and spelled out my loss, which is what you have to do. Knowing why Sally Marr meant so much to me was the first step in grieving for its end. The play had been the center of my life. For 7 years it had absorbed me professionally and emotionally. Because I had thought it would run forever, I had walked away from my daytime talk show, canceled concert tours, stand-up bookings in Las Vegas, and turned down the chance to star in a situation comedy. And now, for the first time since 1968, I woke up in the morning with no job and no place to go. There is no prospect bleaker. A person must have a reason to get up in the morning, and now I had none. I was totally unemployed. In losing my job, I'd also lost my audience. Remember, performers become performers because we crave an audience's love and approval. And doing a play was even more intoxicating than doing stand-up comedy. You make the audience believe that you are the character. Becoming Sally Marr had been particularly challenging for me because the audience was always thinking of me as Joan. When Sally was on stage, I felt the audience was responding to her and not to Joan, and the explosive applause at the end of each show confirmed my belief. And the show was more than heady stuff for me. It was also a valentine to the mother of my professional godfather, if you can follow that fractured genealogy. Sally Marr was the mother of Lenny Bruce, and if it weren't for Lenny Bruce, I might be your Avon lady today. Ding dong. Want to buy a face cream and look like me? I don't think so. In the 1960s, when I had started telling my jokes in Greenwich Village coffee shops, insiders were all telling me, "You can't say that, Joan. No, you're a woman." I was not unaware of my gender, believe me. In a routine about how I got into show business, I used to say, "How do I get booked? Talent? No. I just go into an agent's office and say, 'Hi, I'm Joan Rivers,' and I put out." That was a very funny joke in the 1960s, believe it or not. In the late 60s, no woman said such things in public, and no woman ever said that when she was having her baby she screamed and screamed and screamed, and that was just during conception. Critics felt that such jokes entitled me to a line of work, perhaps in a delicatessen. Meanwhile, Lenny Bruce had been doing outrageous, no-holds-barred comedy and getting great praise for it. So I went to watch his show and to learn, and one night Lenny came to see me perform. And then he sent me a note backstage that said simply, "Joan, you're right, they're wrong." I still have that note. Lenny Bruce believed in me when few others did, and his encouragement gave me the confidence to follow my own instincts and to tell the jokes that I wanted to tell. And so the play I wrote about Lenny Bruce's mother was all tied up with my feelings for Lenny himself, and with my rise from the small stages of tiny clubs to the big Las Vegas shows and the Carson show. Later, when Lenny was vilified and couldn't work, I met Sally Marr, and I liked her so much. Sally was a woman who had done everything on her own at a time when Betty Friedan was still asking her husband, "What do you want for dinner, sweet stuff?" "Let's do a play about Sally," I told Edgar, and we began to interview her. When I listened to those tapes as I began to work on the show after Edgar's death, I could hear Edgar's voice, happy and excited. In that way, Sally Marr linked me to Edgar, the Edgar I had loved and worked with for so many years before his depression set in. And so when the play closed, I had to face the fact that I would never again have a project that had been mine and my husband's together. That was truly the end of our 22-year partnership in life and love and business, and I grieved profoundly for that loss. It wasn't easy, but having a concrete list of what I was grieving for made the whole process of loss and recovery a lot easier. The same list-making method helped me get through the loss of my jewelry business, which happened, of course, at the same time that Sally Marr closed. In 1991, a new home shopping cable channel called QVC approached me about selling face cream. "The way I look," I replied, "they'll only buy it if it's a vanishing cream." We kept on talking, and finally we decided, let's try jewelry. That would be a lot better for me. So I started designing and selling it on the air. Simple pieces, pearl and gold button earrings, a single strand of faux pearls with a nice clasp, a gold-toned watch, the kind of basic pieces you need if you were stranded somewhere and had nothing. I should have called it the Gilligan's Island collection. Actually, we called it the Joan Rivers Classics collection, and it came to me when I was wondering if someone might have to take up a collection for me. However, my designs turned out to be enormously popular, and my company quickly grew. My signature piece was a gold-toned and crystal bumblebee that you'll often see me wearing. As a matter of fact, I think I'm wearing it on the cover of this tape. Aeronautical engineers have studied bumblebees for years and have said that the bee's structure and wing size should make it unable to fly. Well, guess what? The bee, defying all the laws, does fly. It achieves the impossible. And so, it's been my mascot for many, many years. Everything was going wonderfully with the jewelry business, and then, in 1993, QVC was taken over by Barry Diller, the same Barry Diller who had fired me so publicly from Fox in 1987. I was devastated. I was scared to death. Take the business public, said Tom Pileggi, my advisor. Get your money now, then you won't have to worry if Barry decides to fire you again. Tom had met a man called Arthur Toll who held controlling interest in a publicly owned company called Regal Communications. The company was engaged in marketing a variety of products on television through infomercials. It also had developed and produced a series of telephone programs for the consumer market. When Toll offered me $16 million in Regal stock to merge my company with his, it seemed like a perfect fit and a great opportunity. Tom and my other advisors told me to accept the offer at once. $16 million? They didn't have to tell it to me twice. With that kind of money, Melissa and I would be secure for the rest of our lives. Like many people who have been rocked by a major financial loss, I'd become deeply concerned about security, and so I made the deal, even though the terms of the merger of my company into Regal required me to sign away controlling interest of the company, to give up any rights I had to market my jewelry and other products, except through Regal, till the year 2023. But I wasn't worried. My company was strong. Then one day, my broker called and told me that Regal Communications stock was slipping fast. A $19 million debt had surfaced, and Regal had issued $37 million of bonds using my company as collateral. Arthur Toll suddenly was nowhere to be found, and almost immediately creditors were after my autograph on checks. Because mine was the only healthy company Regal owned, they felt that I was liable for the $37 million it owed to other investors. The bondholders told me that they owned the rights to my name and all my income from jewelry and product sales into the coming century. Any profits from the jewelry business or other products would be theirs. Period. That's it. And if I couldn't raise the $37 million, I wouldn't be allowed to design my jewelry or market products with my name on them. I was a slave for Regal. How did a nice Jewish girl end up with the national debt of Nicaragua? I cried for days. Work had always been my way of proving to myself and the world that I had something to contribute. I was overwhelmed by guilt at being unemployed, and being in debt left me terrified. As I wrote down my feelings about the bankruptcy, I admitted that I had been stupid for letting myself be drawn into a bad deal, and I was insanely angry at the people who had led me into this mess. Like most women of my generation, I had grown up expecting a man to take care of me and to make all the right financial decisions, as Edgar had always done. But now I knew that I could rely only on myself. It was time to learn things I had never paid attention to and to take responsibility for my own life. The magnitude of that responsibility had me reeling. Whatever loss has hit you, look hard at it to figure out what you're really losing. That is the only way to get over it. About a year after I got married, says a woman named Megan, a young lawyer in Chicago, my husband told me that he was leaving for a while. That afternoon, I went to the cash machine. I saw our entire account had been cleaned out. I called the bank, and I discovered that Bob had also taken all the money out of our savings and investments and had run our credit card bills up to the max, leaving me liable because my name was on the accounts, too. Walking home with an empty wallet, I realized that Bob had left for good. All I did for 3 days was sit on my couch and cry. But finally, says Megan, I had to admit that the marriage had never felt like a real one to me, and I wasn't sorry to have it over. Having him gone was actually a huge relief. So why was I sitting on my couch sobbing? I was forced to take a good hard look at what had been going on in our marriage, and then I filed for divorce.
There I was, says Megan, 29 years old, and all of a sudden I had this label, divorced. That was a scandal in my Catholic family. I was also upset about the way the divorce would make me the object of office gossip in my law firm. Well, once I admitted to myself that those were my big concerns, not any of my feelings about Bob himself, I could gather strength to tell my friends that Bob and I had split, and then go to work with my head held high. By taking a good hard look at what's bothering me about the divorce, I could deal with each emotion individually and cope with each loss on its own. Freeing myself in that way allowed me to stop mourning and move into action by hiring the best feminist lawyer I could find and getting Bob to pay me my share of the money he'd stolen. As Megan discovered, your strongest feelings about your loss may not have to do with the headlines of that loss, but with the subtext. Her feelings about divorce involve much more than missing her husband. Be honest with yourself about any way that your loss may actually bring some kind of relief to you. That honesty may sound cold-blooded, but believe me, it's also part of the healing process. For example, Edgar's death freed me from having to stay in California after Fox canceled my TV show. Edgar was a proud man. I knew that if he had lived, we would have stayed prisoners in Beverly Hills, refusing to admit defeat, to move away or to start over. As bereft as his death left me, it also left me the ability to say, where do I go now? What do I do? Who do I want to be? Where do I want to live? At first, I felt so guilty at enjoying that feeling, but there was no way to get around it. There were some ways in which Edgar's death opened options for me that I wouldn't have had if he had been alive. Can you be that brutally, painfully honest about your situation? A lot of people can't. I have seen so many widows turn their late husbands into a combination of Einstein and Jesus Christ. Along with the husband, they bury the memory of the time he cheated, or the annoying way his teeth clicked when he ate, or how he never helped with the housework, or how he hated your mother. But remembering loved ones as we wished they were instead of how they really were makes it almost impossible to complete our emotional relationship with them. You don't want to be Queen Victoria, who mourned the death of her husband for the last 40 years of her life. What a difference it would have made if someone had simply said to her, Your Royal Highness, get a life. After a bad shock or loss, give yourself time and permission to grieve in whatever way is natural for you. Don't suppress or deny your feelings. In fact, take some time to wallow in them, for you'll be full of complex and confusing emotions that you're going to have to sort out. But keep your wallowing short. And don't worry if you're not grieving the way people think you should, if you're grieving, as they say, properly or not. Propriety has nothing to do with grief. Mariette Hartley, whose father killed himself when she was a teenager, often said to Melissa and me, Grief is not graceful. I cried all the time. I wasn't exactly Jackie Onassis. From the moment that Melissa and I returned from Edgar's funeral, the house was filled with both friends and strangers, all trying to buffer us from our pain. Unfortunately, I had to be buffered from the pain of some of them. One friend of Edgar's actually went into his closet, put on one of Edgar's hats, and began wandering through the house saying, Mind if I take this? Hey, I'm going to take this. Anybody care if I take this? He was a man who couldn't tell the difference between a wake and a garage sale. Blood may be thicker than water, but believe me, only to a chemist. At times of grief, good friends can be better than bad relations. Only let the people in who will boost you, not sap you. Also, find time when you're grieving to be alone to cope with your feelings. For me, that time would come late at night, long after the visitors had left. Alone in my bedroom, I thought about Edgar and all the dreams we had shared, and I cried for Melissa, for everything she had lost so much since too soon and too horrendously. Being alone with these thoughts was very, very painful, but it was as important to my mourning as the time I spent with my friends. Just remember, survival is the best revenge. Expressing grief is not only emotionally healthy, say doctors, but better for your body too. So go ahead, when something terrible happens, go ahead and indulge yourself in a good, brief wallow. Get under those covers for 48 hours. Do nothing but savor your self-pity. Make lists of everyone who ever hurt you, of every rotten thing that's ever been done to you. Remember, bestsellers are born that way. When I make my self-pity lists, I go back to childhood. I start out with 1. I was not picked to be a healthy tooth in the first grade dental day pageant. I was picked to be an abscess. Then I add, 4th grade I was so fat that on the back of my gym suit it said pass and don't pass. I then get into high school. I had no date for my prom, and my mother kept saying, don't worry, your cousin will take you. But she wouldn't. She had her own date. I write down every slight, every hurt, the big ones and the small ones that have been done to me. And you want to know something? It does purge the pain. After a while, it all just seems comical. I just can't be Tolstoy about what happened to me when I did my act in a seedy Boston bar for $125 a week in 1969 under the name of Pepper January. After the first show, the manager came over to me and said, "Hey, Pep, you don't have any. You're fired." And then as I was packing up to go home from the seedy hotel room where I'd stayed, my agent called and said, "Pepper, I'm dumping you, baby, but I'm keeping the name. Women comics I can always find, but not a name like Pepper January. It just smells success." How's that for pouring salt into Pepper's wound? Ba-dum-bum. And how about you? Still feeling bad by the time you were picked last for kickball in the 2nd grade? Write it down. Don't cross it out and say, how can I complain about kickball when there are children starving in Africa? I'll tell you how. This is not a bravery contest. It's a festival of self-pity. You own the list and no one else will ever see it. So feel sorry for yourself for everything, including your last 6 parking tickets. And of course, make sure to write down what has really sent you to bed in the first place. Your sister-in-law's tragic death, your marital breakup, your pet's death, your wife's breast cancer, the loss of your job. The time that you're going to spend wallowing will actually shorten your recovery time, and you'll certainly want to get up pretty soon and change those sheets. From the moment I heard about Edgar's suicide, many different emotions kept me from thinking clearly. First, I was overcome by despair. Could he really be gone? Then I was overwhelmed by guilt. What if I had tried just one more time to convince him to get help? Now I would never have the chance. And then came the anger. How could Edgar have left me? How could he have left Melissa after everything we'd been through? How could he do it in Philadelphia knowing that when Melissa returned to the University of Pennsylvania in September, she would have to pass the scene of his suicide on every trip downtown? And hadn't he known that Melissa would be the first one to hear the news? The thought that he hadn't at least shielded his own daughter from that horror enraged me. At first, I tried to hold that anger in, but as Jeffrey Gorer writes in Death, Grief, and Mourning, although our culture gives no symbolic expression to anger, a considerable number of other cultures have done so. Rituals included destruction of the dead person's possessions. Gorer must have been peeking through my library window when my anger was so unbearable that I kicked Edgar's desk so hard I nearly broke my toe. At first I felt guilty, but I've since learned that it's all right and even healthy to feel angry at someone who's died, whether it's from suicide, sickness, or old age. And so I cursed and threw things. And Melissa was very angry, too. However, if she and I had known then about the rage that suicide leaves in its wake, we would have felt less guilty about our anger at Edgar and been less likely to turn that anger on each other. So please learn from our mistakes and be honest with yourself about your anger. For a few weeks after Steve left, I couldn't stand to be around anybody else, says a woman named Betty, whose husband came home one night after 28 years of marriage and told her he was leaving with his 24-year-old girlfriend. Suddenly, I found myself snapping at people who were trying to support me. It took me a while to realize that I wasn't mad at them, but at Steve. And maybe at myself, too, for putting up with his philandering for so many years. Finally, I went around the house and smashed every picture of the two of us together. It was incredibly cathartic, and it helped me focus my anger where it belonged instead of taking it out on my well-meaning friends. If you don't feel in a smashing mood, pour out your anger and your bitterness onto a piece of paper. Write a letter to the person or persons who have wronged you, then put the letter aside in a safe place. Do not mail it. Writing unsent letters of rage is a harmless way to acknowledge your anger. Trust me, a year or so later you'll find the letter, you'll laugh and tear it up. Writing your own poison pen letters to people you're angry at, no matter how silly you feel at first, is a great safety valve. Start writing as fast as you can. Speed will keep your inner censor from reminding you to be polite. Write down all the anger, all the unsettled scores, and then let go of the anger and move on, or else the person who wronged you will have dealt you a far deeper defeat. But you don't need to start a revolution. Just stand up for yourself with honesty and guts. And believe me, you're going to need some of those guts to go against the crowd. Deciding not to be a victim puts you totally out of step in America today, where being a victim is the height of fashion. Our favorite sound is whining, and our new national anthem should be, "Don't blame me." If you make yourself a professional victim, you are not going to survive. Your father abused you when you were 7. Terrible, horrible, awful, unbearable. Get on with your life. You're 53 years old now. Terrible, terrible as the act was, that's long enough to reminisce. Either drop it and move on, or get into therapy and move on. Have no nostalgia for misery. Moving on is a gift you give to yourself. In show business, the same people come around again and again. It's a kind of executive recycling, so you have to learn to put your anger behind you, because last year's enemy suddenly is this year's colleague. In 1987, as the head of Fox TV, Barry Diller had canceled my show. 6 years later, when I was in the jewelry business, voila! Diller had become the head of QVC, and once again I knew the truth of the ancient Persian saying, keep your hate list in pencil. In 1993, I was in a hotel room in London when the telephone rang late at night. Joan said a voice that I truly didn't recognize. "It's Barry Diller. Sit down, and I hope you're laughing, because I'm your boss again." The moment Barry said, "I hope you're laughing," I knew we were in a new relationship. It was 6 years later, and it was time to move forward. I had learned that there comes a time when you have to let go of grudges. If you only want to work with only lovely people, then open the yellow pages to convents. As you struggle to let go of your anger, let go of your guilt as well, whether or not that guilt is deserved. If your loss was partly your fault, admit it, of course. Joan, I had to say to myself, you should never have let the cost of Sally Marr get out of hand. And before signing over your business in a stock merger, you should have checked to see if Arthur Toll was managing Regal properly. And you shouldn't have suggested that separation from Edgar. What if you had checked more often with a psychiatrist? And then, like a defendant with a great lawyer, walk away from the guilt and move on. For there's absolutely no pastime as fruitless and foolish as replaying and replaying and replaying the past. You can never know for sure how much of it you caused, and how much was caused by the gods, who have such sport with us. So don't drive yourself crazy. Instead, think about the wonderful prayer written by the Reverend Reinhold Niebuhr. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Once you've acknowledged your mistakes, learn from them while moving forward. That's the only intelligent direction to go. The first rule of survival is, make your own rules. The hell with what anyone thinks about the way you're acting. Listen only to yourself. Keep fighting your own way with courage and with humor and without shame. And my credentials for giving you this rule are, I am an authority on how to keep going when things look hopeless. And believe me, I have been up and down all my life. I am the queen of the yo-yos. Naturally, as unique individuals, Melissa and I handle our grief about Edgar in totally different ways. At first, unable to sleep, we both drifted aimlessly through the house in silence. And then one night she came into the library where I was sitting. She put her head in my lap, just as she'd done as a little girl, and she cried. Soon afterwards, however, the tension between us began. For Melissa was still a teenager, and she resented being suddenly hurled into adult responsibilities. Resenting what the suicide had done to her, she turned her anger on me. And then, both angry and confused, she began to withdraw. And I suddenly came out of my shell and talked and joked endlessly to all the well-wishers who filled our house. At the Shiva, which is the Jewish equivalent to a wake, I was still able to laugh, but Melissa went deeper and deeper into her shell, which really upset me. She was appalled by my telling jokes just hours after Edgar's funeral. Where were my tears? What she didn't understand was that my feelings were so overwhelming that I was able to deal with them only in the way that I've always dealt with pain, by laughing through the tears. And it worried me that my daughter could not laugh. One night, after the week of Shiva had ended, Melissa and I walked into a Los Angeles restaurant. Everyone stared at us, waiting for us to order our hemlock cocktails or stab ourselves with our salad forks. But we held our heads high, and when I opened the menu and saw the prices, I said, Melissa, if Daddy saw this menu, he'd kill himself all over again. For the first time since the suicide, Melissa laughed. The anger left her eyes, and I saw the old sparkle in there just for a moment. And I realized yet again how wonderful and healing laughter can be. I also saw every head in the restaurant turn towards us disapprovingly. Her husband dead a week, and they're laughing?
Those people don't understand we have to heal, I thought. They just want to judge us on their own terms. They're angry that we're breaking their pattern of what mourning should be. At that moment, I knew that Melissa and I had to get away to some place where we could laugh when we wanted to and cry when we wanted to without being told that we weren't following the mourner's manual. So we took a vacation in Greece where absolutely no one knew us, and we felt suspended from our grief, almost outside of it. We were getting ready for what we knew was going to be the hardest adjustment of our lives, living without the third member of our tightly knit team. When we returned, however, we still weren't ready for the different ways that each of us would make the adjustment while facing our grief. Back at the University of Pennsylvania, Melissa began to criticize me constantly. She couldn't understand that I had to be busy all the time to maintain my sanity. After 22 years of marriage, I was desperately lonely in a big empty house. And so when anyone asked me to go out, I always said, yes, of course, when? Anything to get away from the now soundless bedroom. I was the first to arrive at parties. I was the last to leave. I was rebounding as furiously as Dennis Rodman. When a single man I knew invited me and Melissa to have Thanksgiving with him, our first without Edgar, I accepted quickly. But Melissa exploded. If we're not having dinner at home, I'm not coming, she said. We belong at home in California. Daddy's body isn't even cold, Mother. How could you plan a holiday with some other man? How could you? The conversation almost ended with a slammed-down phone, but I never do that. As irritated as I was with Melissa that fall and winter, I never hung the phone up without telling her that I loved her. Our gender and ages made things even harder. To a mother, a teenage daughter is a member of a different species, one that does not communicate at all with human beings. At last, one February day, I went to Philadelphia for a joint therapy session with Missy. We had been arguing for 2 solid weeks. And we continued to argue for most of the hour until the therapist finally said, Melissa, stop. Give your mother a break. She's trying to reach out to you in her pain. And suddenly the venting was over, and I began to cry. Melissa saw suddenly that I also had been struggling with Edgar's death in my own way, and that I also was in pain, and I was trying to cope as well as I possibly could. And she warmed up at once. But now suddenly I was the one that was too hurt and too angry to reconcile. Come on, she said, let's have a cup of coffee. I can't talk to you now, I said. I just want to go back to New York. I just want to be alone. And for several months after that, whenever we went out, we always invited a friend so we would not be alone. I let Melissa know that I loved her, but I revealed no details of my private life for her to judge or criticize. And then, little by little, we found our way back to each other. 2 scarred veterans who had been through the same war, but on totally different fronts. What am I trying to tell you out of all this? What I'm trying to say is, no matter how much you love someone, you must decide what you can give them and when you have to draw the line to conserve your own strength. You must heal yourself before you can help somebody else to heal. Remember this, no matter what way you cope, you're bound to get some bad reviews. In spite of our talk about being rugged individuals, Americans still prefer to be smooth conformists who behave in a proper way. 2 months after Edgar's death, Melissa and I honored our instincts in a memorable way. We were in New York to attend Yom Kippur service at the Temple Emmanuel, which is the biggest Reformed Jewish temple in North America. This was going to be Melissa's first time to say Kaddish for her father, which is the prayer for the dead. The service was to start at 3 o'clock, but because we'd been stuck in a heavy rain, we arrived 15 minutes late. At my synagogue in Los Angeles, a 3 o'clock Yom Kippur service means 3:15, maybe for you, 3:30. At the front door now, however, in New York, the usher looked at our tickets and said, you can't come in. You're late and there are no more seats. In a temple that size, there had to be seats, I argued. As a matter of fact, I could see some, but the usher wanted to show us that he wouldn't bend the rules, not even for a celebrity. So with tears in our eyes, Melissa and I stood in the rain outside the temple. I couldn't believe it. We were barred from the Yom Kippur service. We were barred from being allowed to say a prayer for my dead husband. Insane. I got angrier and angrier and angrier. Melissa looked so forlorn, so lost, standing there in the rain on her first religious holiday without her dad. The hell with the rules of spending the day in praying and fasting, I thought. I'm going to take her around the corner and shop. Where do you want to go? I said. Ralph Lauren? Come on. At least he's Jewish. And when we entered, a sales lady said, would you like wine? I said, you got it. And there, in that temple of fashion, on the day when our religion says that we were to look into our souls, we drank Chablis and looked into 3-way mirrors. I felt that God would understand, especially when he saw Melissa smiling again. So remember, No two people comfort themselves in the same way. Start again by making a list of everything you feel tempted to do, everything short, of course, of tax fraud or robbing a grave. Now, go through the list and cross out anything that might put you into a police lineup. Look what's left. Going dancing while you're supposed to be in mourning, telling off your ex-mother-in-law, taking a leave of absence from your job, house swapping with a family in Tahiti or Buffalo. Remember, do what you want to do. There are no rules in mourning. Whatever you do to work your way through your grief doesn't have to make sense to anybody else but you. After my husband died, this is a woman named Sheila, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I realized there were two things I had never done. Take a vacation of my own and sleep with another man other than my husband. So I booked a flight to Paris and actually bought condoms in a drugstore. Well, when I got to Paris, I realized that I didn't have to sleep with strangers to have the thrill of being a single woman again on the loose. So I flirted with men and even let one kiss me passionately. And when I came home, people said, "Sheila, you look wonderful." But I told them nothing of what I'd done. I didn't feel like being judged about what a widow my age was supposed to do. Sheila was smart. People are particularly critical of widows. At one of my lectures, a woman told the audience that after her husband's death, people told her unsmilingly that she looked marvelous, as if looking marvelous was an insult to her husband's memory. And then this woman told us, to great applause, that her standard response was, "Why shouldn't I look marvelous? I'm not the one who died." In difficult times, pamper yourself. Do whatever you have to do that makes you feel better. Don't stop getting manicures because you've lost your job. In fact, this is the time that your hands should look beautiful. The man of your dreams may be right behind you in the unemployment office. As William Saroyan said, in the time of your life, live. After a tragedy, a loss, a blow of any kind, your mission is simply to get unstuck. It is always a mission possible. Defeat is not an option for you. The game isn't over till the fat lady sings, but remember, your fat lady may have laryngitis. A glowing example of this is, in the summer of 1984, a young woman named Vanessa Williams became the first African-American Miss America. A few months later, the pageant's director learned that a magazine had published nude photographs of Vanessa. She became the first Miss America of any color to be stripped of her crown. She was subjected to unique national humiliation. Well, Vanessa may have lost her crown, but she didn't lose her head or her heart. Conventional wisdom said that the disgrace of the scandal meant she was absolutely finished. Her next career move would be a booking at the Pasadena Auto Show. Well, conventional wisdom was wrong. Vanessa, whose voice was as good as her figure, fought her way back into show business and began to record songs. When her recording of The Right Stuff became the first of her many, many big hits, it was pretty clear that Vanessa Williams had also displayed naked spunk along with her tushy. And so, no matter how trapped in the crazy glue of life you may be feeling, you also can get unstuck. My favorite way to do that is make a list. This time it's a list of all those things that I have to be thankful for. It's a great way to end the day, as Irving Berlin told us when he said, "And I fall asleep counting my blessings." So now it is time to put away your self-pity list and make a much sunnier one. Write down everything that makes you feel good. If you're having trouble getting started, look again at Irving Berlin, who told us how lucky we were just to have the sun in the morning and the moon at night. Except, of course, in Lapland, where they have the sun in the morning and the sun at night. Your gratitude list will get you unstuck and also leave you feeling optimistic about your future. After a death, says psychologist Janice Heil, people often get stuck because they think they need to hold on to the pain in order to retain the memories. Feeling guilty for moving on, they say, "How can I even think of going ahead with my life when the person I loved is gone?" And sometimes, says therapist Amy Bloom, we cling because the memory is so painful that we can't stop revisiting it, hoping to make it come out differently the next time. The risk of letting go is that we have to confront our own selves and our own possibilities. Remember, self-pity shortens your life. Studies have shown that all down emotions can actually lead to illness. Pessimism should come with a warning from the Surgeon General. No matter how distraught I feel, I always draw the line between sadness, which is a natural part of life, and self-pity, which just immobilizes you. The first thing I do is to start moving physically. Get up, get dressed, put makeup on. Put a little lipstick on, darling, you'll feel better. Your grandmother used to say that, remember? Well, she was right. The Cosmetics, Fragrance, and Toiletries Foundation has done research that proved that caring for your appearance can boost your health and relieve depression. So even if you're going to be home all alone, put on some makeup, put on stockings, put on jewelry, especially if you're a woman. Just get dressed. It's a signal to yourself that you are ready to resume living. Let me tell you how wonderful the will to survive can be, whether conscious or visceral. Let me tell you how magnificently a human being can move on no matter what misfortune he or she is moving out of. The 1996 Triple Grammy Award winner was a 33-year-old singer-composer named Seal. Okay, his name is not exactly Mel Torme. It could have been worse. He could have been called Herring. But the right name for Seal really should be Guts. Do you know where this Triple Grammy winner bounced back from? The triple crown of bad luck, childhood abandonment, abuse, and disease. When he was 6, his mother was deported and he was sent to live with his father, where life wasn't exactly father knows best. Father's hobby was beating Seal with whips and belts and fists. He wanted the boy to be a doctor. When Seal started singing, the father beat him even more. As if life already wasn't giving him enough blows, when he was 23, Seal came down with lupus, which scarred his face and threatened his life with a generally incurable disease. But this young man simply refused to let anything stop him. I was always able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, says Seal, whose triumph over adversity has been a definitive example of the fruits of optimism. To the pessimist, the light at the end of the tunnel is another train. Don't you take this view of life's railroad. After a blow, simply figure out, what do you have to do to survive? Having trouble staying away from drugs or alcohol? Go to a 12-step meeting or AA. Do you or a loved one have a serious illness? Make a list of the doctors and treatments you need, and then schedule them at once. Need to pay the mortgage, but your husband ran off with all your money? Call a lawyer, and if you can't afford a lawyer, call legal aid. In the meantime, if you can, borrow some money from a relative or a friend. Need to find work? Check the want ads, see headhunters, and call everyone you know. Network like mad. Personal contacts are supremely important. According to one Chicago placement firm, 40% of all jobs are landed through personal contacts. I mean, think about it. How do you think Hillary Clinton got the health care gig, huh? Ask everyone and follow up on every lead. Keep saying, do you know anyone who might be looking for a receptionist or a teacher or a librarian or a crop duster? A shepherd. Find a job that nobody else has. Fill a void. Be ready to compromise. Be ready to take a pay cut to get started all over again in a new career. Figure out what are your greatest assets and try to find a job that you can use them in. The ability to adapt to new conditions is the key. Forget everything you've ever heard about what's proper and what's suitable for you. Be willing to see yourself in a whole new light. As Helen Keller said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. You probably know much, much more than you give yourself credit for, and your ability to learn is a lot greater than you think. After Edgar's death, I was suddenly aware of great gaps in my knowledge. For example, I didn't know how to balance a checkbook. Balance it. I didn't even know where it was. However, I'd always been a very fast learner, so I enrolled in Accounting 101 at UCLA. In my notebook, I put the kind of financial facts you never get from Alan Greenspan. This is a picture of a withdrawal slip. It takes money out of the bank, if you have any there. Luckily, despite a big cash flow problem after Edgar's death, I had enough money if I quietly sold off a few things not to end up homeless and hungry. Nevertheless, I needed to work again, not only to stay solvent, but to stay sane. Any self-esteem that I had came from my work, which had always been supremely important to me. At first, I was terrified by the prospect of looking for work. Suppose I found nothing but a lively lack of interest in me. I was 52 years old and what they call a star. What was I supposed to look under? S in the help wanted ads? And then I remembered. Even though I had worked steadily for 25 years before my late-night show had been canceled, I was no stranger to unemployment. I had lived through it before. I could live through it again. My very first job as a Barnard student had been taking tours around Rockefeller Center at night. I loved it. You would talk to the public. You would show them around. It was like acting in a little play. One night, however, I was given the late shift, and the tour on that shift consisted of just one man who struck me as being weird. Because I was nervous about his potential, I cut the tour, which was usually an hour, down to 3 minutes, and the man rightfully complained. Unfortunately, my boss the next morning was not impressed by my being able to give a tour that was the length of a station break, and I was fired. And rightfully so, but the blow was enormous. I had loved the job. I had loved playing Radio City. After college, I got another job at an ad agency. Because I was also trying to launch my stand-up comedy career at the same time, I was working at nights in little clubs. I was getting maybe 4 or 5 hours sleep each evening. Being half awake was not a particularly efficient way to check advertising copy. My superior had told me to put an initial over every word and picture to show that I had personally proofread it. One day, one of our clients, a major airline, put a full-page ad into the New York Times saying, "We now fly cross-country 6 times a day." The ad had a picture of 6 beautiful planes, only 11 wings. I let it go through. What did they expect? I wasn't a math major. I was just a tired English major, one who knew that she couldn't do everything well. A few minutes after the ad appeared in print, my boss appeared at my desk to inform me, "You're fired." The really annoying thing was, he had to wake me up to do it. Each time I was fired, I thought, "Oh, God, it's over for good now. I'm never going to get another job." Soon, however, I managed to return to Rockefeller Center, this time in the publicity department of Radio City Music Hall. And there my creativity knew no bounds. We were doing a re-release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and they said to me, "Think up some ideas." "I've got a great one," I said. "Let's get 7 midgets, dress them up as the 7 dwarfs, put them up on the marquee, and they can wave to the kids." Everyone loved the idea, and suddenly I saw myself running the publicity department at the age of 22. Unfortunately, it was a bitter cold day, and my boss suggested I send up some hot coffee to the midgets. No, I said to myself. I'll send them liquor instead. At once they seized the opportunity to get drunk, and they began to shout down remarks to the kids that never would have come from Disney. "Go to hell, kid!" It took 3 security guards to bring them down. Once again, Joan was dopey. The incident made all the papers. I was given another chance to save her unemployment, and I felt devastated. I began to question myself. Was I too headstrong to ever hold a job? And so, many years after lubricating those midgets, I was pondering Fox's cancellation of The Late Show starring Joan Rivers. I told myself, hey, I survived all those things. I can survive again the same way as I always have. I will swallow my pride and move to the bottom of the heap and start again. And I remembered an old Chinese proverb. The glory is not in never failing, but in rising every time you fail. I've always had the feeling that life is like a magical paneled room. If you hit every panel in that room, suddenly one will swing open and you'll realize it's a door. A small door, of course, but it's a door to get you through into something new and different and better. With this thought in mind, when I had no work after Fox, I took in my Rolodex and started calling people. I called the ones who knew me, the ones who didn't know me, ones who didn't like me. I summoned up my courage to call that second group and swallowed my pride to call the third. I talked to anyone who would listen. I told them I was willing to work anywhere at any time as long as I could perform to make people laugh. My friends began laughing when they heard that I finally was able to get myself on Hollywood Squares. Not the old memorable one, but on the new struggling one whose host was John Davidson. John would walk on stage, look at the set, and go, "Hello, stars," and they would all look around to see who the hell he was talking to. The show had stars, I guess, but not stars. I mean, these are people who had almost been on MASH, people whose careers had peaked with guest appearances on The Love Boat, people who were kind of the fifth player down that you sort of recognize his face as he walks through the door. When the producers asked me if I would like to be the center square of this motley group, I said, "Okay, yes." I was working again. I had a place to get up and go to every day. On taping days, I would drive to the Fox lot and make up in my old dressing room because life is run by the gods of absurdity. And the man at the gate would say, "Boy, do we miss you, Joan," and I'd smile with pride in my throat. 6 months before, I had been queen of the Fox lot, and now I was one of the 9 squares in a syndicated and marginal show. At least no one put a spotlight on me as a technician had done on Norma Desmond's Sunset Boulevard and said, "Hey, Miss Rivers, it's Hawkeye. Let's have a look at you." When you are going through a crisis, check your ego at the door. Hell, even when things are going well in show business or any business, the door is the place where your ego should be. The year after Judy Holliday had won a Tony for being the best actress in a musical, for being the incandescent star of The Bells Are Ringing, she was interested in starring in a new show whose producer said she has to audition for it. Absolutely not, said her lover, Jerry Mulligan. She doesn't audition. She's Judy Holliday. Oh, come on, said Judy. It's only humiliation. And so, in finding a new job or a new home or new friends, whatever you're going for, thoughts of embarrassment, humiliation, mortification simply have no place. With merry chutzpah, just keep going forward. After my jewelry business was dragged into the Regal Communications bankruptcy, I knew I'd be needing the best bankruptcy lawyers. No one I knew had ever gone bankrupt, except morally, of course, so I knew I could ask none of my friends to suggest a lawyer. Therefore, I followed a Joan Rivers rule. Whenever possible, go to the top. I called the brilliant businessman Robert Trump, who I'd met just once at that point at a dinner party. Knowing he was probably too busy to even take my call, I said to Trump's secretary, I'm in a huge mess. I don't know what to do, and I need his recommendation of the best bankruptcy lawyers in New York City. I'd be grateful if you'd get back to me with a name. The following day, she called me back with a name. Was it worth prostrating myself before a perfect stranger? Yes. The lawyer Robert Trump recommended for me eventually got my business back. To survive, you have got to be willing to swallow your pride and ask for help. And while swallowing and asking, you've got to figure out every survival skill you have. One of mine happens to be short-term leadership. Give me a project that has to be done immediately. I am the best in the world. However, if Moses had asked me to help him get those Jews out of Egypt and it was going to take 40 years, we'd still be walking around today. I am the woman you want in charge when the elevator breaks down, when the alarm isn't working, when someone has to organize people to keep their cool, but just for an hour or so. Pretending that my life was a broken-down elevator and I didn't have to pretend very hard, I got on the phone at once and called the lawyers Robert Trump had recommended. My acting quickly made it easy to respond to the enraged debtors and to begin the long process of getting my business back. What are your greatest skills and strengths? If you made a list of them for job hunting earlier, return to that list and keep writing down. You'd be surprised how many you have. And let me repeat, keep listening only to yourself. The headmaster of an English boys' school once said to a student who had performed in a school play, I'll tell you one thing, Guinness, you're no actor. Fortunately for the world, that student kept listening only to himself. Alec Guinness. Oh, you can listen to Calvin Coolidge, too. In his lifetime, Coolidge didn't say much. In fact, when informed of his death, Dorothy Parker said, how could they tell? But Coolidge did have one moment, and it produced these memorable words. Press on, he said. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than the unrewarded talent. Education alone will not. The world is full of educated failures. Persistence alone is omnipotent. When I first tried breaking into show business, I got rejection after rejection after rejection. And from the people supposedly supporting me, I only got discouraging words. You have no talent, one woman said. You are throwing your life away. And that woman was my mother, and she really loved me. One of the biggest theatrical agents told me, you've been around too long, sweetheart. Everyone who could help you in our business has seen you. If you were going to make it, you would have made it by now. I went to audition for The Tonight Show 7 times. 7 times. At the end of the 7th audition, the talent coordinator said, we just don't think you're going to work on TV. I had no money. My office was a phone booth in Grand Central Station. I lived out of one of the smallest suitcases I had and slept in my own car. My family thought I'd gone crazy. My father threatened to have me committed to Bellevue. It would have been the only booking I could get. The verdict certainly seemed to be in on me, but I just couldn't quit. Perhaps I instinctively knew how thunderingly wrong early verdicts can be. For example, there was once a Broadway performer named Fred Astaire who went to Hollywood for a screen test. And this is what one studio executive wrote after seeing Astaire's test. Quote, not handsome, can't act, dances a little, unquote. Deep inside me, I must have known that I could be, quote, funny a little, unquote. Do you know how America got Dr. Seuss, its most beloved children's book author? Because Seuss, whose real name was Ted Geisel, was more cheerfully persistent than the Cat in the Hat. In 1937, he wrote his first book,
I think I saw it on Mulberry Street. It was rejected by 37 publishers before a 38th accepted it. 37 publishers had been as dumb as the Grinch, but they hadn't stopped Ted Geisel. And look at Alexander Graham Bell, who did 22,000 experiments before he hit on the telephone. I mean, just a few more, think. He would have had call waiting. So never, 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 never worry about the odds. Didn't General Custer say that? Well, he gave it a shot, and he got more than one back. Bum. Anyhow, of course there are times when you're going to lose. I mean, face it. But you have to stay at the table. You have to keep playing the game. Teddy Roosevelt eloquently put it. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, who knows great enthusiasms, and if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So his place will never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. In the business of survival, one of your greatest strengths is friends. Don't be too proud to ask them for help. I was truly lucky to have so many friends respond when I called them for comfort after Edgar's suicide. Friends like Carl Brown, the English actress and wife of Vincent Price. Always elegantly groomed, Carl drove over to my house in her bathrobe the moment she heard the news. There she was, half naked and uncoiffed, offering her love, oblivious totally to the way she was dressed. Dorothy Melvin, my wondrous manager, left a romantic tryst with a new lover and flew back home the minute she heard about Edgar's death. Tommy Corcoran, for years Carol Burnett's manager, my friend since my days as a struggling young comic, flew from New York for Edgar's funeral in such haste he brought no luggage. And then there was Kenneth Patel, the legendary hairdresser, who never broke appointments, but he broke dozens of them to fly to me. And Marcia Tysley, who had started out as Melissa's governess and ended up a dear and loyal friend, literally slept in my bed for a few nights. And Annie Pierce, my friend and my dresser for 18 years, who flew from Texas, and when I got up in the middle of the night at 4 a.m. to cry, she was there to hold my hand. Overriding my pride was my instinct to survive, which told me it was okay to accept all this help. And help also went to Melissa and touched her deeply. At her college, the Daily Pennsylvanian had run a big story about Edgar's suicide. Moments after the paper came out, two of Missy's friends walked all over the campus and removed the papers from the lobby of every building she usually entered so she wouldn't see them. Often people who can't think of specific ways to help you will be able to help with just a touch or a smile. A lot of people, ones I expected nothing from, says Melissa, would just randomly come up to me and hug me and then walk away. It was very moving. Melissa and I learned that no matter how alone you feel in the face of a tragedy, there are good people around who want to help you. Watch the TV news after a disaster, and you'll see the kind of goodness that I'm talking about. You'll see the way volunteers from all over the country went to Oklahoma City to help devastated families after the bombing, or traveled to Los Angeles after the earthquake, just so they could help in any way they could. Be realistic about what each person can and can't offer you, and then make simple, direct requests, such as, my mother is so sick, and I have to spend every day at the hospital. Do you have any spare time to take my kids to a movie? Of course, even when you're clear about your needs, people sometimes won't come through for you because of their own needs or feelings. Edgar's best friend, Tom Pileggi, didn't come to Edgar's memorial service, and I understood and accepted his reason totally. Edgar had promised Tom that he wouldn't do anything foolish, and Tom had replied, if you do, Edgar, I won't come to your funeral. I had to respect Tom for being a man of his word. There are times when a loss is complicated by a feeling of isolation, especially if you moved into a new town just before the tragedy is hit and haven't made many friends. My husband and I had just retired to Boca Raton when he had a massive stroke, says Sheila. We only had a stick-shift car, and I didn't even know how to drive it, so I couldn't get to the hospital. I had to knock on doors of acquaintances and say, hello, nice to meet you. Could you be my chauffeur? When I hit bottom, I felt like telling people, hello, nice to meet you. Could you reunite me with my daughter? Could you find me a new business? Could you produce a new television show for me? Not necessarily in that order. I'll take any one of the three. However, I shouldn't really say when I hit bottom, because I never saw it as that. After the loss of Edgar, my business and my show, I often remember the words of another Edgar, the one in King Lear. The worst is not, so long as we can say, this is the worst. In other words, if you're still alive, stop bitching. Shakespeare was so smart. Once you find people who are willing to help you, be selective. Find upbeat people, not those who enjoy wallowing in their own misery. And don't accept help from anyone whose motives you distrust. Believe it or not, there are actually people who don't have your best interests at heart. I had one acquaintance, says Missy, who was a compulsive liar. She seemed as though she was really coming through for me, Mom. However, she was just running around telling everybody what she did for me, mostly things that she hadn't even done. She was using her tales of saving me just to make herself look good. Of course, the person doing the most to make Melissa look good was Melissa. Her bouncing back made me think of what Moliere had said. The greater the obstacle, the more the glory in overcoming it. Actually, what he said was, le greater l'obstacle, the more glory in overcoming it. Of all the help you can get, perhaps none is more important than a therapist. From my own experience and from the stories of men and women all over the country, I have learned that some problems are simply too complex to be solved by anyone but a good therapist. Just before Edgar's funeral, a friend of mine gave me the name of a psychologist and said, Joan, I really think you ought to talk to a professional. The owners of comedy clubs used to tell me the same thing, but that's another story. I wondered if any psychologist really could help me, but I was lucky. I found one that could. For there is nothing like discussing your troubles with a trained and objective outsider, someone who carries no emotional baggage and who can listen to you without judging you. In therapy, you don't have to apologize for your feelings or interrupt them to say, well, enough about me, Doc. How's your week been? With friends, no matter how supportive they are, there comes a time when you feel guilty about asking for advice and taking up all their time. No guilt, of course, need be felt with a therapist. It is her job to help you. And remember, a therapist is ethically bound to keep your secrets so you can tell her or him anything. A therapist can also tell you what parts of your behavior are a reaction to your loss and what parts are the fundamental mess that's just you. Are you throwing that bottle at your sister because of what you've just been through or because you want to remind her that she's always been a bitch? A therapist will let you see how your current pain is affecting your behavior and what old wounds still need to be healed. Strict Freudian analysts are more interested in probing your childhood and dredging up memories that can unlock neuroses. They want to know how you felt about being unpopular with boys. Oh, I felt wonderful, Doc. Purity was really important to me. Freudian analysis, however, is usually wrong for coping with specific crises. If your husband just died or your child, God forbid, needs brain surgery, it wouldn't matter if you had been Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. Besides Freudian therapy, there are many other kinds of therapy, such as Rogerian, rational emotive, cognitive, and behavioral. One of them is bound to work for you, and whatever kind you're seeking, shop carefully. What kind of training does he or she have? I was so lucky. The first therapist I went to in Beverly Hills, a man named Michael Greenstein, was a perfect fit for me. He at once understood my situation, and at once I felt comfortable with him. However, even when you do click with a therapist, you'll still need a few sessions before he understands the entire tapestry of your life, before you can say to him, "So then Dorothy said," and have him know what that means. In script writing, we call this backstory. And when you're 52, the backstory covers a good chunk of American history. No matter how good your psychologist is, your sessions will do you good only if you're completely honest. Edgar had deceived a psychiatrist. After the suicide, this man told me he couldn't believe that Edgar had been unhappy. All they had ever talked about was foreign policy and books. It took me a while to open up and tell Michael Greenstein everything. And one of those things was that after Edgar's suicide, I'd become a bulimic. There are two ways that a devastating loss can affect a person's appetite. Either kill it or send it into orbit. For me, the suicide inspired a gastronomic space program. I ate cookies by the bagful and ice cream by the pint. My lunches became huge and my dinners were French and at fine restaurants almost every night of the week. After a few weeks of trying to redefine overeating, I felt bloated and uncomfortable and my clothes all felt like rubber bands. Rather than say goodbye to my entire wardrobe, however, I came up with a solution, one that also might have occurred to a village idiot. I stuck my finger down my throat to make myself throw up. Ha-ha! And within minutes, my stomach was flat again. Now, this, I told myself, was a popular pastime for the Romans. What I didn't add was, Jews generally prefer gin rummy. At first, I allowed myself this treat just once a week after an especially big dinner. Then I began to do it twice a week, then every night, then twice a day. I figured out that the best time to make myself throw up was exactly 30 minutes after I finished eating. Such precise recycling of my meal wasn't easy. While glancing nervously at my watch, I had to stretch the dinner conversation so I would still be at the restaurant half an hour later, or I had to rush the eating so I could be home in my own bathroom for the magic moment. For some reason, I never bothered to mention to my therapist this little trick I was doing with my intestines, putting them into reverse twice a day. I told myself that it was just a little diet plan. A disgusting one, of course, but one not relevant to my recovery. Exactly how would I put it? By the way, Dr. Greenstein, my finger isn't just for reading the wind and calling cabs or pointing to French pastries 2 or 3 times a day. Guess what? I stick it down my throat. And then there was one more consideration. I didn't want to stop throwing up, at least not yet. Then there came a point, however, when I could no longer hide the truth either from myself or Michael. One afternoon, I was in a limo on my way from New York to Atlantic City. Suddenly realizing that it was half an hour after I'd finished my lunch, I told the driver to pull over at the next rest stop. Dorothy, my manager, looked at me in shock, but she knows how fastidious I am. I once flew all the way to Rome without using the plane's bathroom, and even in the best hotels, I always have to paper the toilet seats before I use them. Yet there I was, asking to pull over at a highway rest stop. If you have ever been in one of those highway rest stop bathrooms, you know that sticking your finger down your throat in one of them would be redundant. Nevertheless, I told Dorothy I really have to relieve myself, but I wasn't truthful about the specific kind of relief. Moments later, as I threw up my lunch into a filthy toilet, I was wise enough to think, this is really sick. I was being welcomed to rock bottom, and it was time to tell Michael about my bulimia. But I was afraid he'd think I was certifiably crazy and beyond his power to help. At the same time, I was also afraid he'd force me to stop. Now, how's that for being mixed up? Michael, however, did what all good therapists do. He helped me to understand my behavior so that I could change what had to be changed. Your life is out of control, he said. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what you're doing. You don't even know who you are anymore. The one thing you can control is what goes into your body and what comes out. And so, with Michael's help, I learned to control not only my eating, but also my life. And when he died in 1993, I'd been having fewer and fewer sessions with this wonderful man. Michael may have been gone, but my feelings for therapy were stronger than ever. And so when I felt betrayed and alone after my bankruptcy and the closing of Sally Marr, I knew I had to find a New York psychologist, and fast. I was in a deep depression once again, despondent over the loss of my husband, my business, and my Broadway show. Desperately worried about bankruptcy and desperately afraid of growing older alone. For the first time in my life, I was possessed by despair. I had big decisions to make, and I didn't trust myself to make them. I needed the objectivity of a professional. First, I had to decide if I should stay in New York or move back to California to rebuild my career. And after all my setbacks, maybe all I was good for was to be a lounge act in Tijuana. Melissa kept saying, move to California, live near me, Mommy. But my New York friends kept saying, why? You have a whole new life here. Why do you want to move back to the left coast? This time, finding a therapist wasn't so easy. The first one I saw said nothing for 4 sessions but uh-huh. Finally, I said to him, aren't you going to say anything? Must I be the only one to talk? And he said, tell me, why do you want me to say something? Next came a man who just stroked his beard and said, this is going to be very interesting. I never had a comedian before. This is going to be very interesting. I never had a comedian before. I didn't care if it was going to be very boring. I wasn't there to be amusing for him. I was there to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. Shrink number 3 never smiled even when I made funny jokes, and that was the last thing I needed was a shrink who was a tough house. And the 4th one didn't stop laughing. He said he was a big fan of mine. At last, a friend recommended Dr. June Townsend. I went to see her, and we clicked. She perfectly understood my situation and my despondent feelings. She helped me come to terms with the end of Sally Marr and to decide what to do with my life. With her help, I admitted that I had never been happy in California, even when Edgar was alive. And so now my choice was to rebuild my show business career in California and be socially miserable, or enjoy a good social life in New York where rebuilding my career would be much harder and be far away from my child. For about a year, I saw Dr. Townsend twice a week until I felt strong and confident again. Since then, I've been seeing her only once in a while whenever I have to vent particularly strong feelings or get advice about my relationship with Melissa. If your own daughter or some other family member has created a problem for you, you may want to consider bringing other family members to therapy sessions so that your therapist can see how all of you interact, if you're still speaking to each other. If not, he'll get you going. In addition to the help of family counseling, you can also find help from various support groups. They exist for every situation you can imagine, from parents of murdered children to parents of people with AIDS. After Edgar's suicide, I attended several such group sessions. I learned perspective about the suffering of other people.
Into our survivors group one particularly bad day for me came a woman looking so marvelous I wanted to kill either her or myself. She was one of those blue-eyed blondes with a stunningly beautiful face and a model's body and an outfit by Chanel. As if all this perfection weren't enough, she moved with total self-assurance. Yeah, what's your problem, honey, I thought. Split ends? A few moments later she began to speak to the group, and I learned that her problem indeed was an end. The end of her husband and 2 children, who had just been killed in a plane crash. And now this vision of absolute loveliness was afraid to be alone because she was afraid she might kill herself. Her tragedy reminded me of the ancient wisdom. Never criticize someone until you have walked a mile in their shoes. No matter how good someone's life may look from a distance, she may be living with unseen, unbearable suffering and sorrow. Joan, I told myself, if that woman can get out of bed in the morning after losing her entire family, you can certainly survive suicide or theatrical failure or bankruptcy or anything. You've got Melissa, the most important thing of all, so just stop feeling sorry for yourself. And I suddenly remembered an old Russian proverb that my mother used to quote. If everyone hung their troubles out in the wash line, people would see what others were going through, and they'd take their own troubles right back in. By being with other people in a support group, you can see a hell of a lot of laundry. You can see how many people share your troubles and how many make your troubles look almost like blessings. You can see how wide the range of normal behavior is and of how many different and valid ways there are to cope with grief. Your friends and family may have strong expectations about how you should behave, says psychologist Janice Heil, and those pressures can be unbearable. Being in a group can give you the strength to resist them. The truth is, of course, all of us are crazy in one way or another. But whatever way your craziness may be, short of thinking you're a dolphin or wanting to make love in Penn Station, it mustn't stop you from functioning and moving ahead. If it does, you've got to lie down and tell someone about it, or do the telling standing up, but for God's sakes, do the telling. Don't share just your craziness. Share your victories, too, no matter how small they are at first. Giving my self-help lectures is a kind of therapy for me as well. Sharing my battlefield knowledge with a room full of other survivors helps to keep me going. Of course, I also like getting laughs from survivors and the world at large. I mean, how could I ever complain when I've had such a splendid career? Getting paid to make people happy? To tell a joke in front of 6,000 people and hear them laugh and then get money? It definitely beats saying, so you want that here or you want it to go? Even after you're feeling better, please stay in group therapy a while because your insights will help others and make you feel strong and capable. Even consider volunteering to work with people who've had a loss like yours. Hey, I know how to get through this, you can say. Let me show you how. I've been there and I'm back. After Edgar killed himself, I was tempted to stay mired in memories and regrets. In fact, I thought more than once about becoming our family's second suicide. But I knew I couldn't leave Melissa alone. I had to show her there were responses to tragedy other than the one her father had chosen. In those first awful days after the suicide, I just wanted to get into bed and take up permanent residence there. But I kept telling myself over and over again, you've got to be strong for Missy. You've got to get through this for Missy. This responsibility to Melissa turned out to be my salvation. It was the only thing that could have gotten me out of bed and made me feel the need to go on. Moreover, I recognized that my daughter wasn't the only one depending on me. Several employees counted on me for their livelihoods, and a couple of dogs needed me a lot. Spike, my Yorkshire Terrier, had been my constant companion for years and continued to give me unconditional love that could only come from a pet. Maybe not a goldfish, but certainly a dog. For this reason, therapists tell us to look to every living thing for a reason to go on. Deborah says, I was in such shock and pain after my husband was killed in the plane crash that I didn't get out of bed for almost a month. My mom had come to help with the kids who were 9 and 11. One day my mother came into my bedroom and said, Debbie, you may be 39 years old, but I'm still your mother, and I can still tell you a thing or two. Your girls need a mother, and they need one now, and if you don't get out of bed and start being that mother again, they are going to have serious problems. It was the jolt that I needed. It was a reminder of the people who needed me. People who need people, as Barbra Streisand used to sing, are the luckiest people in the world. Knowing that someone is counting on you means you simply aren't allowed to leave the arena where Teddy Roosevelt felt that all of us belong. Who is counting on you, besides the IRS? Make a list of the people. You'll be amazed. You say you can't think of a single person who needs you to get out of bed? Well, then maybe it's time to sign up for some real volunteer work. Read to sick children in a hospital. Deliver meals to people who can't leave home. Take a blind person for a walk in a spring garden. Do something with your life. Stop thinking about you. Poor me, poor me. Enough. When I moved to New York, I began volunteering for God's Love We Deliver, which is a group that gives meals to homebound AIDS patients. The first time the staff saw me come in, they must have thought, wow, great, a celebrity. Let's get her name on the dance invitations. Tell her all she needs to do is just lend us her name. But I didn't want to be a window dressing. I wanted to wash windows if I had to. I wanted to donate my time. I wanted to take food to someone who needed the company. I wanted to give a laugh to someone who could really use a laugh. Hell, I could really have used one, but I couldn't worry about myself right now. I just knew there was someone counting on me to get out of bed and get dressed and deliver food, and that made me feel great. After convincing the God's Love people to let me take suppers to AIDS patients, I forgot all about my own misery and dropped my new hobby of feeling sorry for myself. In short, get off your back and give something back, and then watch that happiness ricochet. Pardon the sermon, I really don't mean to sound like the Reverend Rivers. I'm certainly not a Puritan, but I do confess that the American mania for total retirement bothers me, because doing nothing all day is, in the words of Cole Porter, my idea of nothing to do. Whether you've just been through a tragedy or merely the Lincoln Tunnel, the way to save yourself, the way to make both your mind and body strong is to look outside yourself. Retire, says Bob Hope, who was 93. Retire to what? Although motivation is the best response to adversity, laughter is a great response too. This doesn't mean you shouldn't give a drowning man a laugh instead of a rope. It means, if you don't know what it means, you're in more trouble than you think. Scientists, however, have recently learned a remarkable fact. When you put your facial muscles into a smile for just 10 seconds, natural juices in your system start flowing and they trick you into being happy, whether the smile is heartfelt or not. I mean, it's incredible. Your brain thinks you're happy and you become happy. And I think it's better to be a fake at happiness than an honest depressive. Not only is laughter wonderful for your morale, it's actually good for your physical well-being. 100 laughs a day are the equivalent of 10 minutes of aerobic exercise. Researchers at Stanford University have found that laughter improves respiration, muscular function, blood pressure, heart rate, and can even relieve pain. In fact, hearty laughter raises the heart rate to more than 120 beats a minute. That's as hard as your heart pumps during sex. And guess what? Laughing doesn't mess up your hair, and you don't have to fake it. If a couple routinely laugh during sex, they could live forever. Instinctively, I have always turned to humor to help me heal. And not long after Edgar's suicide, I turned to it again. I took Missy back to her room just off the campus of the University of Pennsylvania in West Philadelphia. It was a typical off-campus student house. Chipped paint, rotten beams, scattered dirty clothing, a floor sticky with beer. You would have had to fix the place up before it could be condemned. When we walked in, Melissa's friends were very uncomfortable. No one had seen us since Edgar's death, and they were unsure of how to react. There was a terrible, awkward silence, and then I said, Missy, thank God your father's dead. If he saw you living here, he'd kill himself all over again. It was a variation on the line I'd used to get a smile from Melissa when we'd had that tense dinner shortly after Edgar's suicide. But again it worked, and again it broke the tension. In this Philadelphia branch of Tobacco Road, Melissa's friends saw that Missy and I were laughing, and they laughed with us. And the laughter bound us all together. Unfortunately, student rooms were the only rooms I could play in those first painful months after Edgar's death. The week after his funeral, my agent had come to the house to see me. I thought he was there for a condolence call, and in a way he was. What had died, he told me, was my career. Instead of giving me a basket of fruit, he decided that I was now a lemon, and he gave me back my contract. Joan, I hate to say this, he said, without seeming to hate it at all, but no one will book a comedian whose husband has just killed himself. It would just make the audiences too uncomfortable. My agent's brush-off would have been a perfect excuse for me to quit comedy, but I've never wanted to play the role of a victim. Too many people are playing that role already, and I've never wanted to be a part of a mob. Moreover, I desperately needed to keep on working, rather than just to sit home and feel sorry for myself. I needed the charge an audience always gave me, an audience bigger than Melissa's roommates. I also needed a few great laughs myself. And so I told Dorothy Melvin, help me make calls. Let's get a booking. Book me anywhere, I told her. Anywhere. I was ready to play the lounge at Pennsylvania Station. Well, Dorothy didn't book me there, but she did find a very strange place, the only place that wanted me. A tiny little comedy club outside of Buffalo that held 84 people. That's if the 84 people all came. As I stood backstage of that comedy club, wondering if the act after me would be a koala playing a kazoo, I told myself, well, Joan, this may be just a little better than talking to yourself, but at least you're doing what you know how to do and what you love. Suddenly I was on the tiny stage, overwhelmed by a fear that they wouldn't laugh, a fear that I might not still have it. Boldly, I decided to cut the tension about Edgar by discussing him right at the top. As some of you may know, I said, it's been a lousy year for me. My husband committed suicide, and then he asked to be cremated so that I could sprinkle his ashes all over Neiman Marcus. That way, he figured, I'd visit him at least once a day. For a moment, I heard a massive gasp. And then it broke, and I heard the laughter that had always been my basic reason for getting up in the morning. The audience was happy to feel at ease, and I was even happy to know that I still had the gift that I cherish most. When you are going through a tough time, your friends may feel very uncomfortable about doing any laughing. They may opt for steady solemnity. Well, let them know that you are solemnly in favor of laughing, which dispels tension and creates outlets for feelings that confuse and overwhelm us. The minute the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up, there was a joke about it. There had to be. It's people's way of getting the tension out of themselves. And not long after that terrible, terrible plane crash in the Everglades, I remember reading this joke on the internet. One alligator to another. Not bad for airline food. Whenever I am in terrible pain, I particularly enjoy black humor. And so do many, many other people. And this is nothing new. Right after Lincoln's assassination, this line went around Washington. Except for that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? Another way to generate your own happiness is to be generous with praise. Whenever I like something about a person, whether it's a new haircut or an old blouse, I always pay it a compliment. And on the flip side, I never point out anything that might make someone feel uncomfortable. Do everything you can to make people feel comfortable. When having dinner with friends, I always make eye contact with everybody at the table. I try not to leave anybody out, even the most quiet ones. And I strive to be like the hostess in the following story, which may be apocryphal, but who cares? There was once this elegant dinner party at which the hostess suddenly noticed that one of the less sophisticated guests was starting to drink from his finger bowl. The hostess then lifted up her own finger bowl and started to drink, so the guest with the misplaced thirst would not be embarrassed. When you're an upbeat person, says a woman named Faye, other upbeat people want to be around you. That's why I always put a positive spin on everything. I even send out a colorful divorce announcement. The problem with pessimism is it's too easy. It's like betting on the sunrise in the east. Of course you're going to lose more often than you win. Of course more things will turn out wrong than right. But is it any fun living that way or any adventure? And remember what Helen Keller said about adventure. It is the essence of life. Many experts feel that you can learn to look up rather than down. In his popular book, Learned Optimism, psychologist Martin E. Seligman says, a pessimistic attitude may seem so deeply rooted as to be permanent. I have found, however, that pessimists can, in fact, learn to be optimists. Optimism allows you to keep life's small aggravations and frustrations and setbacks in proper proportion. It reminds you of that wonderful two-line philosophy. 1, don't be bugged by the small stuff. And 2, it's all small stuff. If you want to move forward, and you should want to move forward, after loss and depression, you have to create a healing environment. Does that sound like a suggestion to build a hospital? Well, I apologize for any phrase in this tape that accidentally resembles psychobabble. By healing environment, I simply mean a place where you feel content. A place you look forward to entering every time you open the front door. After Edgar's suicide, I quickly realized that my house in Beverly Hills was no longer a place to heal my wounds and to plan a new life in. The house was suddenly too big and too empty and filled with memories of a life that no longer existed. So I began to spend a lot of time in New York City. I had grown up in suburban Larchmont and spent my early years as a comic in Greenwich Village. And unlike my painful recent past in Los Angeles, my New York history was an ancient and a very happy one. In New York, I had friends, not in show business, friends who wouldn't remind me of everything I just lost. And although Missy didn't want me to sell our California house, my friend Tommy Corcoran began taking me to see apartments for sale in New York. One afternoon on a lark, he took me to see an apartment in what had been once the mansion of J.P. Morgan's daughter. It looked more like the home of Morgan the pirate. I mean, rotting walls and broken windows and warped floors and rubble in every direction. When Tommy took one look at the place, he started laughing, and while he was laughing, I turned and said, "I'll take it." Even the real estate agent tried to talk me out of it. But where he saw a salute to trash, I saw a challenge, something to keep me excited and busy in a period when I had too much time on my hands and too little to be excited about. The renovation took 2 years, and I enjoyed every screaming, frustrating minute of it. I was building a new home where I could feel secure after so much that had been taken away from me. I even made a girlish peach-colored and lace bedroom that I'd wanted for 30 years. Okay, so house and garden wouldn't do a layout. Okay, maybe modern recycling would. The place just happened to be saving my life. There was a melancholy side, of course. This life-saving new duplex off Central Park did leave me with mixed feelings. Edgar would never walk through its door, and Melissa would visit often, but she was a college senior now, and she would never really call the apartment home. Joan, I said to the freshly gilded moldings on the day I moved in, "This is where you're going to live your new life." After your own loss, you may not be able to move or renovate, but you can make some changes in your surroundings, even if you just rearrange the furniture or get a new comforter for your bed or paint your kitchen. Do you really want that couch your ex-husband made you buy? The one where he cuddled for hours with the remote control, trying to remote control you too? As soon as I got rid of all Bob's things, says Megan, whose husband cleaned out their joint bank account and withdrew himself from their life, I used my next paycheck to have my apartment recarpeted. It just felt dirty to me because he had lived there. I needed it to look different so I didn't feel so rotten every time I walked in. And it worked. Like Megan, a man named Kevin found a great release in clearing his home of painful memories. For a while after the accident, he says, talking of the injury that left this champion swimmer partly paralyzed, I kept all my swimming trophies, but they were just a reminder of everything I had lost, so I got rid of them, and I put different stuff in my room, including my guitar. I hadn't played it since the 7th grade, but I started playing the blues again. I didn't like it as much as swimming, but at least it reminded me there were other things I could do. As you move around photos and mementos after a loss, you're going to have to decide. Does the picture of a vanished friend bring you down or remind you of happy times? And that seashell you picked up when you rented the beach house with friends that summer after college? Does it bring back happy memories, or does it make you think your life will never be as good as it was when you were 22? Anything that makes you unhappy, a picture, a memento, a husband, should just go out or be hidden away. When you're grieving, giving things to friends can be very comforting. Before selling our house in Beverly Hills, Melissa and I invited some of Edgar's close friends over to take things they wanted to remember him by. Their choices touched us. One man picked only a book whose hidden meaning he and Edgar had often argued about. Another said he wanted one of Edgar's raincoats. And Tom Pileggi, Edgar's closest friend, picked a Timex watch that Edgar had bought one morning after noticing that his real watch was running slow. Giving some of Edgar's possessions to people who had loved him spared me the burden of making my home the heavenly gates of Rosenberg. Of course, I still wanted his presence. Seeing his robe still hanging on the bathroom door gave me comfort. And now, 9 years later, I still keep 2 of his tweed jackets hanging in my closet. Whittling down Edgar's wardrobe to a few things that meant a great deal to me is a metaphor for the way I've moved on. I've always kept a place in my heart for Edgar, but just as I've made room in the closet for clothes of my own, I've made room in my life for new friends and new experiences. To move on with optimism after a death, you need to hold on a bit and let go a lot. And you absolutely have to use whatever helps you to generate your optimism about the future. I mean, why do so many people insist on listening to Billie Holiday and Edith Piaf when they're depressed? Tuneful dismay is the last thing you need. If you're feeling down, put on a pretty shirt and an upbeat song. It is hard to be blue when you're hearing New York, New York. It's a wonderful town. Whenever I need a lift, I play show tunes, and you should turn to whatever music makes you feel absolutely wonderful. No doctor can write a prescription that lifts you like Gershwin, and the Baroque boys, woo, they can put you even to a higher orbit. The famous pianist Oscar Levant was once stopped by a cop for speeding, and he tried to use the intoxicating power of music as an excuse. I couldn't help it, Oscar said to the cop. You just can't go slowly when you're listening to Handel. In spite of the fact that randomness seems to govern our lives, I still believe that life is like a movie and you have the power to write your own script. It may not always be Mary Poppins, but it needn't be the Bride of Frankenstein either. Mine, of course, is St. Joan. Needless to say, so why am I saying this? Even the rosiest attitude won't bring you a full, rich life if you're not in action in Teddy Roosevelt's arena. If you do nothing more each day than watch all my children smile at friends, you're in trouble. I hate to say this about one of America's founding geniuses, but Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, the big TJ, made a mistake in the Declaration of Independence. In it, he talks about every American's right to the pursuit of happiness. I don't think happiness is a goal to be pursued. It is a byproduct of involvement in rewarding activity. People who pursue happiness itself are like greyhounds chasing mechanical rabbits. The truly happy person never has time to ask himself, am I happy? I love the words of the noted modern psychiatrist Thomas Szasz. Happiness is an imaginary condition, formerly often attributed by the living to the dead, now usually attributed by adults to children and by children to adults. After Sally Moore closed and my jewelry business went bust, I was in a mood that would have had to lighten a bit to become black. Nevertheless, I made sure that all my days were full, even when I was home. I started having meetings to try and set up new projects, no matter how far-fetched and insane they were. I started making notes for a new screenplay. I even signed up for a playwriting course. I knew that most of my efforts wouldn't lead to a deal signed or a film made, but that's the nature of my business. You cast your bread on the waters, and often all you get back is soggy bread. However, the nicer part of the nature of my business is that, whether or not the work ever reaches an audience, you still have had the pleasure of doing the work. The creation is half the fun, and sometimes it's all the fun you're going to have. It's the only kind of fun poor Vincent van Gogh had. In his entire lifetime, he sold only one of his paintings for 50 francs, and I think that was to his brother. The creative process is a deeply rewarding one, and as I wrote my new screenplay and new proposals, I loved seeing the pages grow. Whatever your profession or avocation or even hobby may be, as long as it's not writing long hold-up notes, throw yourself into your work. It can be a wonderful tonic. When Carl was diagnosed with AIDS, says a man named Bill, I promised myself two things. I'd spend as much time with him as possible, and I'd keep myself as busy as possible for the rest of the time. And I did. I worked harder at the software company than I'd ever done. It was ironic. All this horrible stuff was going on in my life, but I was getting promotions and raises. Work gave me something to focus on instead of the pain that was to come. After I was laid off, says a woman named Bernadette who lost her Wall Street job, I just sat around the house for 7 weeks feeling so sorry for myself. I had money saved, thank goodness, but I was really getting depressed. There was a joke going around at the time. How do you get your broker's attention? A waiter! But after laughing at that, I thought, you know what? Waitressing isn't such a bad idea. Well, a friend in a restaurant got me a job there, and I did a few shifts just for the heck of it. And then I discovered I like it. And it sure beats spending the day watching shows about alcoholic lesbians and nuns and transvestite space aliens. If you can't work or don't want to, then for God's sakes, as I said before, volunteer. No, not for God's sakes. For yours. There is no better way to get something than to give something back. Vanessa was my life, says a woman named Lorraine. After she was killed, I had nothing to do all day except sit around and cry or wander around the mall trying to avoid the children's stores. And then I learned about Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and I started to work for them. My work couldn't, of course, bring Vanessa back, but it gave me a good way to channel my anger and my grief and a productive way to fill my days. Being busy made me feel so much better. You simply must have a reason to get up in the morning, or at least the early afternoon. Without something to strive for, our lives become meaningless. The most miserable people I know aren't those who have to work 2 jobs to pay their rent, but those who can't think of a single thing they still want to achieve, and a stock dividend doesn't count. Some of the richest people who ever lived, for example, Doris Duke and J. Paul Getty, led lives that could only be called impoverished.
In fact, a 1996 survey by Forbes magazine of America's 100 wealthiest people found they were not fundamentally any happier than the working class. And believe it or not, even winning the lottery doesn't guarantee happiness, for many lottery winners have admitted they are still unhappy. Some have lost good friends, some have been bothered by the thought they had no control over the winning of the money. Our Puritan heritage is hard to escape. My heritage, of course, goes back to good old cotton cats. But there was something unsatisfying about getting money you didn't work for. Earning money is much more rewarding. During World War II, one commanding officer had this credo for his men. The hard way is the best way, not because it's the best way, but because it is the hard way. That's macho. Even animals need challenges and goals. Think about it. Last year, Gus, a polar bear at the Central Park Zoo, began to sit around listlessly. He just kind of looked at the water. He's never moving. He just wouldn't play with the other bears. Nothing. An animal psychiatrist was found, and he said that Gus's problem was too much time in his hands and too little to work for. Well-fed, pampered, Gus had no need to feed or protect himself. When the zookeeper started hiding Gus's food and Gus had to hunt for it, his depression quickly disappeared. One of his new goals was, I have to eat. The zookeeper looks delicious. As you bounce back from a crisis, you may decide that you liked your life just as it was before disaster struck, and that you would like to recreate that life as well as you can. Many people have shared this feeling with me. It may not sound like the loftiest goal, said a woman named Robin, but my objective after Marty went to jail was just to keep my apartment and not have to live on a smaller scale. With that in mind, I worked hard and studied hard and focused on finishing school and getting a good job. Let's hope that Marty didn't get out and rob her. On a more serious note, a woman named Nancy, who was diagnosed with bone cancer before her freshman year in college, says, I'd been perfectly happy with my life before I got sick. I had lots of plans to go abroad my junior year and to graduate from college and go on to law school. All those old goals were important to me, and I decided I wanted to achieve them despite the time I had to take off for the operation and the treatments. In examining my own life after Edgar died, I decided, just as Robin and Nancy did, that there was much of my old existence that I wanted to restore. I wanted to get back into show business and start performing, and I wanted to start going out and becoming part of a couple again. This prospect of dating was very, very scary, of course, for I knew the rules had changed. I mean, did a man bring you flowers or his blood test when he reported for a first date? There were also parts of my life that I did want to change. A major one was deciding to move to New York City. I knew that moving would mean making new friends. And I decided that when I moved to New York, I would build a social life around people who made me feel comfortable. Loss may force you to realize that you have talents you haven't been using and interests beyond the ones you've explored. After my husband died, says Sheila, I realized I'd always tailored myself to his habits in so many little ways that I now was living a life very different from the one I had dreamed of. I loved my husband enormously, but I also had to put him and the kids first. Well, I said to myself, now it's my turn. And I set out to recapture some of the dreams I'd had when I was younger. For example, I'd always wanted to be a writer, but Alan and I had gotten married when I was finishing college, and in those days, having and raising children came first. I'd always wanted to take really adventurous vacations, but Alan liked tamer ones. So I got brochures on both writing courses at the local community college and on adventurous vacations. I'd had a wonderful time in Paris, but now I knew I could travel anywhere I wanted to myself. And I slowly got back in touch with what I had enjoyed and wanted when I was younger. I began to feel that the rest of my life wasn't going to be just an afterthought, but a whole new adventure. There are no second acts in American lives, said F. Scott Fitzgerald. Well, guess what? He was wrong. In fact, Fitzgerald himself had a second act after the mental breakdown of his beloved Zelda and his own crack-up. He became a Hollywood screenwriter and also found a new love. So what was he talking about? And what a second act Nancy staged for herself. At 15, she was a poor, pregnant high school dropout. Then her misery had a change of pace after a rotten marriage. She fled with her 4 children, juggled several jobs, and finished her education. Today, that Nancy is chairman and CEO of Mevitech, a multi-million-dollar software business that is one of America's fastest-growing Hispanic-owned companies. That's a second act that rates a few curtain calls. My own fiancé, Orrin Lehman, is another fine example of the resilience of the human spirit, of how a life can be splendidly rebuilt. In 1940, Orrin was at Princeton, where he played football, polo, tennis, and starred on the track team. He once told me that if he'd been asked in his 20s to choose between sports and sex, he would have taken the track instead of the sack.
Then World War II broke out, and Oren enlisted and lost a leg in Germany. However, instead of feeling sorry for himself, he came home, earned a Ph.D., and became the head of New York's New School for Social Research. On one leg and crutches, he marched with Martin Luther King Jr. He ran for New York City Comptroller and won, and then he became the New York State Commissioner of Parks and Recreation for 23 years. But there was one more thing. Oren had to see if there was a sport he could still play, and there was. When I watch him hit a golf ball as he balances on one leg, I tingle with the thought that the human spirit is indomitable. Either you vegetate and look out the window, or activate and try to effect a change, says Christopher Reeve, who is planning to walk within 7 years. Now he is truly Superman. And so, as you're bouncing back, ask yourself, what do I really want out of life? And write that answer down. You've probably decided that you want a wonderful social life, a successful career, fabulous looks, and a marvelous relationship with one special person. But those are just vague wishes, not concrete goals. Your goals have to be specific. For example, I want to write advertising copy. I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to meet a plastic surgeon who is giving out freebies. Be as specific as you can with your social goals and your other goals too. What does success mean to you? Helping battered children? Becoming a corporate vice president? Working 9 to 5 so that you have time for all your outside interests? Or having a job that you enjoy so much you don't mind working till 10, 11 o'clock every night because it's not really work? Of course, with a job like that, you'll have the social life of a mother superior, so understand what that's going to mean going in. Also, think about your spare time. What new skills or hobbies do you want to learn? In The Psychology of Happiness, Michael Fordyce says, happy individuals have many sources of happiness. When your happiness depends on only one thing or one person, you are on shaky ground. And he's right. Things might have worked out differently for Othello if he'd had a pastime besides Desdemona. A diverse identity will save you if you're having trouble in any one area of your life, says Dr. Georgia Whitkin, a psychotherapist. If things are lousy at the office, you're less likely to feel hopeless if you're also a mother or a lover or a great tennis player. When you make your list of things you believe can make you happy, you may find more than one dream in each category. For example, you might want to be a surgeon and a concert pianist. You probably can't name too many of those guys. Someone who might be fixing a hernia in 3/4 time. But it's all right. Let your fantasies fly. Of course, a surgeon who's also a concert pianist is liable to have her beeper go off during Brahms. If you're having trouble coming up with any buried dreams, then ask yourself, if I won the lottery tomorrow, how would I spend the money? On a trip around the world? If so, consider doing some traveling in your non-fantasy life. Would you give a big hunk of your winnings to the zoo? Then consider going to work at a pet shop or simply getting a pet of your own. Would you buy municipal bonds? Whatever it is, try to make that dream and fantasy come true. Another way to learn about your interests is see which section of the Sunday paper you turn to first and which ends up lining your bird cage. Business, news of the week, arts and leisure, real estate, society. After Steve left, says Betsy, it struck me that I always turned first to the real estate section to see the layouts and the ads of the new condos. I had a real fascination with space and decorating, and so when I needed to work after my divorce, I figured, what the hell, I'll try to be an interior designer. Once you've trimmed your list to lofty but still attainable goals, you have to ask yourself, what's the cost of pursuing this goal? If you decide you'd rather be a neurosurgeon than a crossing guard, you're going to need 8 years of training and a high tuition. And if you want to run a marathon, you're going to need just as much training and a high threshold of pain. Dream big, but be realistic. Sometimes one goal will displace another. For example, you can't sing opera professionally and also be a lawyer unless you plan to have no clients. There is simply not time for both. And it's almost impossible to renovate a house and learn Chinese. If you want to know Chinese and renovate a house, you had better be Chinese. Nevertheless, in spite of the all-or-nothing philosophy that many of us have, it is all right to do a couple of things imperfectly if that blend will make you happy. Learn a little Chinese and renovate just one room at a time. Too many of us are locked into the all-or-nothing approach. We say, I'm never going to get that Ph.D. degree, so why bother even going back for my bachelor's? If my jeans say I'll never be a size 4, then I might as well forget about size 4 jeans and just keep on eating. This attitude, however, keeps you from taking that vital first step. As the Chinese say, even if you have to listen to this in English, a journey of 10,000 miles begins with a single step. Once your goal list is trimmed, do not be stopped by the fear of failure or criticism or ridicule. Failure, in fact, although painful, can lead to new chances. Would I ever have thought about going to the jewelry business in the early 1990s if my show business career had been booming at that time? And what was my training for this business? Making shell necklaces when I was 6 at the beach? Doing doodles of earrings even as I talked on the phone? However, a passion for something can make up for a lack of formal education. And if you find that you do need the education, then go out and get it, no matter how long you've been out of school. You can't wake up one day and start writing for a newspaper, says Sheila. So I knew I had to take some courses. At first I was ready to give up because I figured out by the time I was ready to start writing professionally, I'd be 63 years old. And then I realized that even if I didn't go to school, I'd still be 63 on exactly the same date, so I might as well go to school. The biggest obstacle to your success is often not the degrees or knowledge that you lack, but what you think you can't achieve. You tell yourself, I'm too dumb, too fat, too shy, too unsophisticated, and you reminisce about every insult you've ever heard. So to banish the negative thoughts, you've got to tell yourself how wonderful you are. This might not have worked for Bonnie and Clyde, but it will work for you. Make a list of everything you are good at and read it out loud at least once a day, being very sure, of course, that nobody hears you, but definitely listen to yourself. Write down not only your strengths, but also the memorable compliments that people give you, for such a double list can lead you to dispel self-doubts and will your way to good things. In Success is Not an Accident, Dr. John Kappa says that handwriting bypasses the conscious mind and implants ideas directly into the powerful subconscious. This is the best first step in changing your life. When you write something down, you are defeating resistance in 3 ways. You are actually thinking about what you're writing. You are physically writing, and you are seeing it as you write. All of us grow up with labels and expectations that often are foolish or untrue. Maybe you were the difficult sister, or maybe like me you were the fat and shy one. Removing those labels is supremely important, the way that Alec Guinness removed his label of no actor and Fred Astaire removed dances a little. You'd be amazed to know the seemingly confident people who have had to give themselves pep talks. Many years ago I asked Laurence Olivier if he'd ever suffered from stage fright. I have to give myself a little speech every night, he said. I look out at the stage and I say to myself, Larry, that is your space. All of that space. You deserve to be there. No one else fills it the way you do. Then I go out. That was one of the reasons he was Laurence Olivier. Another was a hell of a lot of talent. Whether you are walking out to play Hamlet or to begin a journey of self-discovery, the pictures in your mind have the power to make things happen. For example, professional athletes often visualize themselves moving to victory. I still get a thrill thinking about how Joe Namath, the great quarterback of the New York Jets, used such powerful, positive thinking in the 1969 Super Bowl game. Going into that game, Namath's Jets were 17-point underdogs to the mighty Baltimore Colts. There was just one factor that hadn't been considered. Namath had decided that the Jets weren't going to lose. I guarantee we'll win, he had said before the game. People laughed at his boast. At the end of the game, Namath was cheered from coast to coast for leading such an upset, but it had been no upset to him. It was simply a plan that he had made. If you aim for the stars, my grandfather used to say, you'll land on the roof. But if you aim just for the roof, you'll land in the cellar. It probably sounded a lot better in Russian, but my grandfather knew we often fall short of our dreams. He also knew that we didn't have to accomplish everything. In fact, the act of working toward a goal often can be as rewarding as reaching it. My bumblebee pin, which represents achieving the impossible, is actually my second favorite piece of jewelry. My favorite piece is a pin that Edgar gave me, a little diamond turtle with his head sticking out. This is how you've lived your life, Joan, he said. A turtle can't move unless it sticks out its neck, and you've always stuck out your neck and taken trudging little steps to get where you're going. Slow and steady won't do much for your bet in the daily double, but it's the way to win the race of your life. From the beginning of my career, I've kept moving ahead in measured little steps, never taking my eye off the goal in spite of the 3 R's: resistance, ridicule, and rejection. First, I had to find myself, perhaps in response to all the producers who said, "Get lost." You see, in the beginning, I didn't really want to be a comedian. I wanted to be an actress. I went from agent to agent to agent. Each one watched me perform and then responded with a heartfelt, "Forget it." They told me I had everything I needed to be a star, except, of course, for looks and talent. After hearing such moving, warm responses, I would wander back to the receptionist and make jokes to cover the hurt I was feeling. And the receptionists began to tell their bosses, "She's funny." At last, one of the agents said to me, "Joan, I'll never send you out as an actress, not if I want to stay in this business. But there's a chance I could get you something in a little comedy club. Did you ever think of stand-up?" I considered this offer for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and boy, did I accept it. And at that first little club, which had all the theatrical chic of a Texaco station, I began to try out my jokes and hone them until they got laughs in the right places. Slowly, over many years, I moved on to bigger agents and bigger jobs. I was not exactly what you call an overnight sensation, but nobody really has been. The exceptions are so few and so memorable. Barbra Streisand exploding from nowhere in the Broadway musical, I Can Get It For You Wholesale. Carol Burnett enchanting a nation of TV viewers with a hilarious song. I made a fool of myself over John Foster Dulles. Leonard Bernstein's burst of genius as a substitute conductor at Carnegie Hall. Shirley Temple in her first film, and of course the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show. But that's not the way it's usually done. Most careers are like Elmore Leonard's, writing book after book in obscurity until one of them, Glitz, was finally a hit. In the early days, my goal was a simple one, to be an international star and to entertain the whole earth, though I wasn't sure how I'd go over in Iraq once they learned I was Jewish. True to that Chinese saying, my journey of 10,000 miles had begun with small steps. I reminded myself of those steps after Edgar's suicide, and 3 years ago during my professional and personal lows, I reminded myself of them again. Both times the big dream, small steps approach had worked for me. And so no matter how defeated you feel, no matter how tired and dismayed, please never lose sight of your goal and never stop thinking of ways to reach it. Keep thinking of life as that paneled room and keep pushing all those boards until one turns into a door and it swings open. As I said, it'll probably be a small door, so you better watch your weight because you've got to go through it. After Edgar's death, when the nighttime television shows and the big nightclubs suddenly never heard of me, I forced myself to work on Hollywood squares and in the tiniest of comedy clubs. I couldn't allow myself the luxury of feeling humiliated, just as Patti LuPone couldn't waste time nurturing humiliation after Andrew Lloyd Webber fired her from Sunset Boulevard. She eventually returned to rave reviews as Maria Callas in Broadway's Master Class. Working on Hollywood squares and in tiny clubs kept me busy and helped build my confidence to take bigger steps and make bolder moves. In early 1988, I read in the New York Times that Manny Eisenberg, a major producer, was planning to start a repertory company at Lincoln Center. A few years earlier, I had met Manny when he was recasting The Odd Couple with women instead of men, and he had offered me one of the leading roles. After reading this Times story, I called him and asked him to keep me in mind if any parts came up that I could play. At this point, I was so determined to bounce back that I felt I could play Lady Macbeth if the audience would just simply accept, gee, she had a New York accent. Who knew? I thought she was Scottish. A few weeks later, Manny told me there was a part in his new production of Neil Simon's Broadway Bound. I flew to New York, watched the play, and was absolutely enchanted. The part was a gem, and I felt the part had been custom-made for me. Kate Jerome was a mother who tried to do everything right for her family and still lost them all in the space of just a few months. I'll kill for the part, I told Manny. You'll have to read for it first, he said. Once they reach a certain level of fame, many performers will no longer audition, but that kind of misplaced pride has never been mine. I read for Manny and Gene Saks, the director, and the moment I had finished, they offered me the part. 25 years had passed since I had tried to push my way into the offices of agents. At last, I was literally Broadway bound. To get the part right, I worked harder than I had ever done before. Every night until the wee hours, I went over and over and over my lines at home. My taking a Broadway role would have a lot of people looking hard at me. When opening night finally came, my nerves were absolutely raw. In the New York Post, Clive Barnes wrote, "Rivers is beautifully truthful and touching." I was dazzled to see the other New York papers give the same opinion, one that even I, the big dreamer, had never allowed to addle my brain. I had never planned to be Helen Hayes. Gabby Hayes, maybe, but never Helen. Nevertheless, it was true. Joan Malinsky, the loser of Larchmont, had become a Broadway star. Once I saw how much the critics and audiences liked me, my confidence grew and grew and grew, and when Broadway Bound finally closed, I was ready to conquer other parts of show business. Comedy clubs all over the country began to book me again, and soon I was welcomed back to Las Vegas. The dead duck was a phoenix once again. Although I was thoroughly enjoying all the work and the gratifying responses, something was still missing. I missed interviewing people. Not long after I'd been struck by this thought, my agent called with an offer from the Tribune Corporation to host a syndicated daily television show. When I had a meeting with the Tribune people, I found we had a great rapport. There was none of the hostility that had been a fundamental part of my relationship with Fox. I agreed to do the show and went on the air with delight. For the next 6 years, the Joan Rivers Show was my happy home. It gave me a place to do the kind of television I had always done best. Freewheeling comic monologues and exchange with people that ranged from funny to deeply felt. I was working again. I was laughing again. I felt wondrously worthwhile. In 1990, this rewarding life peaked with my nomination for an Emmy. All during the ceremony, as I waited for the show to reach my category, I kept telling myself, don't be silly. Just being nominated is enough. Doesn't matter if you win. Doesn't matter if you win. You're full of baloney, myself replied. Just being nominated may have been good enough for Geraldine Ferraro, but it wasn't good enough for me. It mattered like hell if I won. And the power of the theater of the mind worked for me. My name was suddenly called out as the winner of the Emmy for the Best Talk Show Host. Ah! The rush of joy that I felt was stronger than anything I had known in years. At the podium, I accepted my award and I held it high in triumph, the way the Wimbledon winners often do. In my elation, I thought of Edgar and how proud he would have been at the distance I had come, both professionally and personally, in the 3 years since his death. I reminded myself that even though life is governed by accidents, this hadn't been one. No. This bouncing back had been endless hard work and no misplaced pride. Not once had I said, I'll only take work that will get me an Emmy. Instead, I had said, I'll take any work I can get. I'll do whatever I have to do. I have to survive. And I did that work with little steps, just like that turtle that Edgar had given me. There is no other way to rebuild a career or a life. In bouncing back, you have to take one challenge at a time, moving ahead like the turtle with a steady pace and a very thick hide. All the while that I was fighting to regain control of Joan Rivers products, I was in another battle too. After Sally Moore had closed, I was deeply depressed. However, just as I had done after Fox had canceled my show, I said to Dorothy, let's get on the phone right now and start setting up meetings with anyone we think might have work for me. Let's do everything we can to get me a job. Because the nighttime shows like Leno and Letterman was still refusing to book me, it was now 7 years, I looked in other directions and found new homes on shows like Politically Incorrect and Howard Stern and Regis and Kathy Lee and Conan O'Brien. Jumping all over the channels, I was also guest host on Larry King and Good Morning America. I began to regain confidence in my ability to bounce back. As always, I knew that yet again, I had to be willing to start small. For several years, Don Rickles had been asking me to co-star with him, and I'd always said no. I always feared that if he and I were together on one bill, the audience would overdose on a mix of comedy that was almost too rich. Each of us had a strong, distinctive voice that needed to be complemented by a softer one. This time, however, when Don Rickles came with his offer, I said, the hell with my theory of how to blend comedy, and I hit the road with him. Just as the three tenors have worked out so musically, so did the two mad mouths. And although I no longer wanted to tour endlessly, I realized that touring is what I would have to do if I wanted to keep on working. So I went on the road with Don, and had a wonderful time. Audiences adored the pairing, and our double bill worked hilariously. And what also began to work was my telephone with calls from someone other than lawyers. In 1994, E!, the entertainment network, called and asked me to do the pre-award show for the Golden Globes. At first, I was a little reluctant to say yes, because at that time, few people had heard of that new network. However, once again, it was work, and it was work that let me try to be my very best. I knew I had always been a natural on TV, and I desperately missed doing it. Therefore, I decided to meet with E!'s executives, who turned out to be savvy and enthusiastic people. You can do anything you want, they told me. No holds barred. No holds barred. Those happen to be my 3 favorite words in the English language, except perhaps for, "You're over 50?" Doing that pre-award show turned out to be another great move. I was playing through my strength, ad-libbing good cracks about the stars, their sex lives, their clothes. The show received a very high rating, and the network asked me to consider more hosting. They also asked me to consider using as a co-host a young lady named Melissa Rivers. Since I knew that young woman's work from her first finger painting, I accepted with delight. The first show that Melissa and I did together for E! Was the Academy Awards of 1995. With Missy on one end of the runway and her mother on the other, the two of us interviewed the nominees as they walked in. We kept throwing the talk back and forth to each other, and for the first time in my career, I wasn't bothered that my co-star was younger or prettier or sexier. I was just too busy being consumed with pride. The kid was terrific. In the 2 years since that Oscar show, Melissa and I, the Jewish Judds, have done many more award shows and fashion shows for E! And all of them have brought the highest ratings ever received by this suddenly hot and very watchable channel. This little step-by-step style is also the way I rebuilt my social life. After Edgar died, I knew that I wanted to start dating again because I missed the feeling of belonging with someone. I missed the pleasure of sharing the silly details of my day with someone who actually cared about how that day had gone. I missed the comfort of someone to kiss my forehead when I was sick, and someone that I could take care of when he was sick or down. An anthropologist once said that one of humanity's strongest needs is to know there is someone who cares whether you've come home safely. And equally sweet is having someone to make the trip with you. As the song in The Golden Apple says, it's the going home together when the day is done. But dating? Dating? At my age? When the Marine Corps refers to a few good men, it also is referring to what's available to a suddenly single woman. Dating? After 22 years of marriage? I had no idea how to even start. I mean, the last time I'd been dating, I would say to a guy, "What's your major?" However, when you're over 50, if you ask a guy where he went to college, he may not remember. Nevertheless, I began to meet a few single men, and although nothing seemed right, I began to accept their invitations, reminding myself that if I wasn't going to go on dates to have a great time, I was going on dates to meet someone I would like well enough so I could stop going on dates. In spite of the somewhat unromantic approach, I was surprised to discover that even in middle age, even after 22 years of marriage, I still got crushes. I found myself nervously waiting for phone calls. I found myself trying on 46 different dresses before each dinner date. And in a restaurant, I would wonder, am I talking too much? Am I talking not enough? Am I being charming? Am I being too loud? In my first months as a dating woman, I felt awkwardness and disappointment, and I even shed a few tears. But whenever I thought of giving up, I also thought how nice it would be to have someone with whom I could share a midnight snack in my kitchen. In the fall following Edgar's death, I met some nice men at business meetings in New York. And when I was looking for an apartment there, I met a real estate mogul, as he told me he was, who was both charming and funny. And although we became good friends, I wasn't in love with him. But the problem for him and for me wasn't the wit, it was the fit. Our styles and priorities were simply too different. Nevertheless, I will always be grateful that my first beau after Edgar's death was a man whose warmth eased my way back into the scary world of old boy meets old girl. My next romance, however, was not so hot. I met a man who instantly impressed me with his culture and polish, but as the months went on, I discovered he had neither generosity nor warmth. Cheap and cold is not a combination that Jerome Kern ever wrote about. One night at a dinner party, after this man had ignored half my friends and insulted the others, I looked in the mirror and said to myself, Joan, it is better to be by yourself than to be with someone who is going to make you angry and upset all the time. After I sailed away from that iceberg, I spent many months dining out with groups of girlfriends, and I suddenly found out I could live alone for as long as I had to, and I was enjoying it. And then, as if being rewarded for my self-sufficiency, the gods sent me a very special man named Orrin Lehman, who is kind and witty and generous and loving. Your first relationships after the loss of a love may not be successful, but those early groping tries will slowly move you towards the sweet permanence that you deserve, or not. Remember, it's great and fine and terrific to be alone. Americans don't mind if you're born again religiously, but a professional or social rebirth seems to give them a lot of trouble. The changes in my own life have made some of my old friends very uneasy. My moving boldly in new directions had made some of them wonder, whatever happened to the old Joan? Have they been witnessing some kind of three faces of Joan? Sometimes I laugh and think if Edgar returned today, he wouldn't recognize me. His Joan is now living in New York, lecturing on survival, playing golf, and running a prosperous jewelry company. The woman who couldn't find the checkbook, and if she did find it, she might have used the checks as bookmarks. As passionately as Darwin, I now totally believe in evolution. Edgar's wife was a comedian and nothing else, but my life in the last 3 years has taught me that anything is possible if you refuse to let yourself be stopped by the size of the challenges you face, and instead break those challenges into small, conquerable ones. At times, being a mother has been absolutely overwhelming. Restoring my relationship with Melissa after Edgar's death was a long and often agonizing process for me. By the time she had returned to college for her senior year, Melissa and I were enjoying each other's company. And when graduation neared, she told me that her classmates wanted me to speak at the ceremony. At first, the invitation delighted me, but then I thought, I don't want to turn this into commencement starring Joan Rivers. I'm very flattered, I told Melissa, but I don't think I should. This is your moment. I don't want to steal it from you. Mom, she said warmly, it would mean a lot to me if you spoke. And so I addressed her college graduating class at the University of Pennsylvania. I told a few jokes, and I gave the usual commencement advice. There was nothing usual about the way I felt on that graduation day. My daughter had been through more pain in 2 years than any woman deserves in her lifetime, and she had come through it. Not only had she graduated with a class on time, but she had graduated with honors, and even more important, she had retained her kind and sensitive heart. When I finished my speech, I looked into the audience and I saw Missy and the friends who had helped her through the last couple of years. Few sights on earth are more moving than a college graduation. Melissa and her friends looked so brave and confident as they prepared to head into the big, scary world. Those kids would need so much courage and luck. They were so young. I love you, Melissa, I suddenly said, as if the two of us were just home alone, and she answered by blowing a kiss to me from her seat. I was so overwhelmed by joy and pride and relief that we had found our way back to each other that I could barely hold myself together long enough to leave the podium. And then the entire class rose up and gave me a standing ovation. My stand-up career should have ended right there, for knocking them dead years later at Buckingham Palace would have been just a lounge act compared to this. Of course, that was the first applause I'd ever gotten that wasn't really for me. It was for my daughter. When Melissa moved to California to look for a job in television, I knew that we would always stay in touch no matter what life threw at us. We both had worked too hard to rebuild our relationship, and we knew we would never let it fall apart again, and we haven't. In 1995, Melissa and I decided to make a movie together, Tears and Laughter, the Joan and Melissa Rivers story. Yes, we told the incredulous interviewers, we are going to make a movie about Edgar's suicide and its aftermath, how it affects a family. And yes, we are going to play ourselves. I mean, who else is going to play us? Cher and Tori Spelling? The actual acting itself was healing for us, and we became close girlfriends, as actresses often do on location. We laughed together and gossiped together and hung out together through the 3 weeks of shooting, and we supported each other in the most painful of scenes. One of the first scenes we shot was of the two of us, totally distraught, coming out of a limo right after Edgar's funeral. For some reason, it took hours and hours to set up the shot, and I was afraid that Melissa might not be able to handle the emotion when the time finally came to replay this moment. But I knew what to do. If Daddy were producing this movie, I said, He would have had this shot in the can hours ago. Our mutual pride in Edgar's ability made the scene work. Side by side, Melissa and I watched the dailies every evening, and my considerations were always the artistic ones. Did we read the lines well? Did our thighs look good? When I finally saw the first rough cut of the entire film, I was deeply moved, but not for what seemed like the obvious reason. Yeah, of course it was tough to watch the funeral scene, and yes, my arguments with Melissa were awful to see again. However, what moved me the most was the pride I felt for Melissa in having gone through a horrendous ordeal with style and becoming an admirable young woman and a damn good actress. For a mother and daughter who don't lose a man to suicide, things still can be tough. A daughter's teenage years can be a mother's attempt to make contact with a UFO, unintelligible female opponent. But Missy and I have survived those alien encounters and also an encounter with an unthinkable tragedy. And now we're bound to each other not just by love, but by friendship also. Whatever your own goals may be, whether they involve family or work, you can reach them the same way that I reached mine, by never taking your eye off your goals. Let no setback discourage you. Keep going steadily ahead, and remember, the flight of the bumblebee. Yes, you can achieve the impossible. As painful as your challenges may be, they can teach you about your strengths, about who you are and what you value. Armed with that knowledge, you're going to reach a point where you will want to drop all grudges. The weekend of her college graduation, Melissa said, "Mom, have you heard the tape yet?" "The new Billy Joel," I replied, trying to be so hip. "You know the one." "Honey, I just can't. I haven't been able to." "I think it'll help you," said my daughter, a daughter giving wisdom to her mother. And so I listened to something that pierced my heart. In a voice full of love, Edgar on his tape said, "I know what I'm doing, Joan. I'm sorry, but I have to do it." At the end of his tape, he said, "I know you'll get through this because you're strong, and I know you'll be just fine." When taping those words, Edgar had known me better than I knew myself. How I wish he had chosen some other way to let me prove my strength. But prove it I did. And you can too. We are all much, much stronger than we think. One night, when I was laughing with friends, I suddenly realized every single one of us has taken terrible blows that we thought would finish us. And yet all of us now have not only survived, but we're laughing. The human spirit is like one of those tricky birthday candles. It simply cannot be extinguished. In life, the only thing that you can expect is the unexpected. The only surprise is a day that has none. I am always amused by those annual planners like filofaxes in which people delude themselves into thinking they are controlling the future. Only one entry will always be right: to be knocked on my butt and to get up again. In the years since Edgar's death, I have rebuilt a life for myself full of challenge and purpose. Although I still miss him deeply and am grateful for the time we had together, the love we shared and the daughter we raised, I am truly happy again. Man is the only animal that has the power to laugh. In fact, I've always felt that the luckiest people are those described by a writer named Raphael Sabatini, who said, "Born with the gift of laughter and the sense that the world was mad." Of course the world is mad. The healthier the economy becomes, the more the stock market goes down. Sonny Bono is in Congress. And in central New Jersey, there is a sign on I-95 that says, "The highway you are on is 95 north, 295 south." In other words, you are coming and going at the same time. Perhaps this kind of geography explains why a Federal Express package sent from Brooklyn to the Bronx first goes through Nashville, Tennessee. And if you follow I-95 east or west, from Nashville, you will reach Anaheim, Azusa, and Cucamonga. Meanwhile, in the words of the learned Yogi Berra, when you reach a fork in the road, take it. I have been through so much madness that Yogi Berra makes sense to me. And I will raise my demure little voice to tell you, with laughter and with courage, you can survive anything and bounce back, and I mean anything. Just please be honest with yourself about what you have lost, what you want from life, and how you're changing. Seek help when you need it and comfort when you want it. And don't judge yourself too harshly, and don't let anyone else's judgment stand in your way.
And above all, remember that nothing is impossible, and there are happy endings, not just manufactured by Disney. To commemorate one such ending, when Melissa was graduated from college, I embroidered a needlepoint pillow for our library as a gift for both of us for surviving and being able to find happiness again. The pillow says, "Welcome to Joan and Melissa's excellent adventure." And so, I wish you luck, and more than that, I wish you the vision to create your own luck. Branch Rickey, the great general manager who brought Jackie Robinson into baseball, once said, "Luck is the residue of design. In the design of your new life, may you be Frank Lloyd Wright." And remember, everyone has a right to be happy, even Princess Diana.